Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became unpredictable part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗃 from 𝗵𝗃. So let's start the video. To say the air surrounding class 1 was strained would have been an understatement. It wasn't every day a class of first-year high school students had to deal with the aftermath of one of their own classmates being kidnapped, tortured, hurt, and experimented on by the League of Villains. Only the UA teachers and 𝗵𝗃 understood how it felt to have lost someone so important, to have had a treasured student, friend, and son go through something like their boy had. Recovery was slow and somewhat unproductive. The victim in question returned, the same yet not the same simultaneously. Izuku-centric, for a better lack of words, was a noumu now. No, he was not a creature black as tar with exposed brain tissue, and fundamentally mindless. While his genetic structure was altered, showing definite signs of possessing new quirks, he still looked like the ordinary boy that entered UA several months ago. Save for his eyes, of course. His brilliant green irises were still present, but the whites of his eyes were now black like 𝗬𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵. Then there was his mental and emotional state. Cognitively speaking, he seemed fine. But from the moment he was saved thanks to a successful hero raid, it was obvious he wasn't all there. When he was rescued, he'd been unresponsive to the rescue team consisting of several pro heroes. 𝗬𝗏 and Izawa were at the scene once their student had been safely extracted, gently handed over to them by a giant mount lady with a concerned look on her face. No one could get him to speak. He merely blinked while staring straight ahead, his obsidian and emerald eyes screaming in fear. They rushed him to the hospital, where Recovery Girl was waiting. After finding nothing physically wrong with him, it was a matter of waiting until the boy's mother arrived. It was only when she entered his hospital room that he showed any hint of emotion, his body reacting for him by pulling the woman in for a desperate hug as soon as she'd reached his bedside. Still, his eyes had stayed wide open, even as tears escaped them. A week later, when they finally coaxed him into speaking, he told 𝗬𝗏 to kill him. "Mom," he stated brokenly, his voice sore from disuse. The woman in question smiled, crying tears of joy at the word. Her boy was finally speaking again. "I love you." She threw her arms around him, hugging his now thinner body close. "I love you too, sweetie. Oh, Izuku, my baby, I've missed the sound of your voice so much. I've missed you so much." "I know." He hugged her back, his lips quirking up just a tiny bit. Everyone else in the room could tell he was faking it for his mother's sake. But, can you leave the room for just a minute? There's something I need to tell the heroes that I don't want you to hear. Please?" A flash of hurt flashed in her eyes, but it vanished as soon as it came. "Sure thing, Izuku. Just holler when you're done." "I will. Thank you, Mom." The moment she was out of the room, Izuku turned to 𝗬𝗏 looking more serious than he'd ever seen him. "𝗬𝗏," he demanded, ignoring everyone else in the room completely. "You need to kill me." Izawa had wished the boys' classmates hadn't been standing there behind their teacher to hear that. It only made his job of asking them to leave the room while they talked to their students so much harder. "You don't understand," he'd whispered after listening to 𝗬𝗏 and Izawa tell him how they could not carry out his request. "If he finds me, he'll order me to kill you. He'll order me to kill my friends, maybe even my own mom. I can't let that happen. I won't be able to stop myself though. And because of what he did to me, I can't even trust myself to be able to kill myself. The quirks make sure of that." Both of the teachers froze. Quirks? It had taken 2 more full days to get a story out of the boy. Broken sentences that stated he'd been hurt, healed, tortured, and in utter hell around the clock before they finally decided to turn him into a noumu of some sort came to the surface. He admitted he got twitchy, lost his mind if he wasn't given an order every so often. He got even more desperate when he explained he would be hard-pressed to ignore a direct order from Shigaraki from now on. It was visualized to be like a switch in his head that he couldn't turn off. He was terrified he would hurt someone because of it. "They trained me to never ignore an order from my master. If Shigaraki," he flinched, "ever orders me to do something, I will have to listen. It's like something else takes over when he talks to me. I black out until whatever I was told to do is carried through, until I receive another order, or am told to back down. All other orders given by anybody else come second to him. I'm so sorry. I wish I had more control, but I tried for days to resist. I really did." All Might could feel his heart breaking. "My boy, what did he make you do?" Izuku closed his eyes. "I can't remember. All I remember is waking up to another Naomu's dead body on the ground in front of me one time. Other time I woke up in..." His breath hitched as his hands curled around his forearms tightly. He squeezed himself so hard his nails cut skin. "Young Midoriya, you do not have to continue." Aizawa nodded in agreement. "He's right. Don't push yourself." The greenette shook his head. "No, I need to say it, because I'll never be able to forget. I vaguely remember Toga Himiko ordering me around one night after Shigaraki grew bored with me. She must have told me to hold still, because I remember coming out of it as she sliced me up over and over again in her bed. It hurt so bad I screamed once I was able to. But by that point, she just ordered me to do something else. After that I woke up in her bed hours later. I wasn't wearing any clothes, but..." A whine broke from him then. All Might cried freely as he watched his students stare at them in regret, embarrassment, and raw anguish. Even the usually cool Aizawa couldn't stop himself from punching the wall beside him so hard his knuckles split open. He silently paged for a nurse to assist him with the damage as All Might wrapped the boy in his arms and cried enough for both of them. All the adults could do was silently vow to put those villains behind bars as soon as possible. Nevertheless, despite how much Izuku wanted to be locked up so Shigaraki could never get to him, All Might convinced him to come back to school. Everyone begged to see him, wished to help him heal, and wanted to figure out how he could get past the changes he had no control over. They needed to see him smile again. In the end, the only reason he said yes was because he had a couple new quirks that he needed to learn how to control. "They gave me another form of shock absorption that turns any damage I receive into kinetic energy I can then store up," he explained to his classmates, teachers, and authorities separately. "I also possess some sort of healing quirk. Not full regeneration like the first noumu we encountered at the 𝗧𝗏, but I'm capable of healing from lacerations, burns, poisons, broken bones, and a few other physical injuries." No one had pushed him to find out how he knew those things. They already guessed the answer. He'd been gone for barely a week, yet the horror they had caused during that time felt like a couple of lifetimes' worth. There was one added comfort though. It came with Aizawa taking precautionary measures, and having Hatsum from the support course make the invention Izuku had asked about upon All Might refusing to kill him. They're noise-canceling headphone earmuff thingies, just like you asked for. The pink-haired girl reassured her recently rescued friend. "Once you put them on, not even present Mike's voice will be able to get through. I also installed that other feature you wanted, in case of emergencies where you think they might be taken off. Just rotate either one of the circles on either side, and the rest of the centerpiece will transform them into a helmet that can only be taken off with your verbal command of helmet off, or by me manually overriding it." Izuku had been so grateful he missed the frown on his friend's face as she walked away. Moving back into the dorms had been tricky too. "Aizawa-sensei." "Yes, Midoriya. Is it okay for me to move my room to be the vacant one next to Kaken's room? If anything happens, I feel more comfortable having him right next door. And Todoroki would only be a floor above and Ida a floor below too. I feel like it's safer than me staying where I am now on the second floor. Not that Takoyami, Aoyama, and Mainta wouldn't be able to handle me or aren't great friends. It's just..." His teacher cut him off with a sigh. "If it puts your mind at ease, then that is fine with me. Let your classmates or myself know if you need help moving your things, and I can go get you the other key right now." Izuku seemed as if he was going to cry, but no tears came out. This observation made Aizawa's stomach twist uncomfortably. Had he cried at all since he'd been rescued? They had also needed to come up with a code for when Izuku relapsed. His psychological requirement to be ordered around was sickening, objectively speaking, because it was born from the experiments and genetic changes he'd undergone while captured. It hadn't been a huge problem during his hospital stay since he'd taken plenty of what he saw as orders, suggestions from the doctors, recovery girl, his teachers, and mother as what he needed. Only after being released from his hospital room, where people phrased things more as questions, was when it had first happened. It had been horrifying to watch. "Aizawa-sensei," Izuku was suddenly gasping. He'd gone pale and shaking just moments before, barely a minute passing before he recalled what his dependence felt like. "You need to tell me to do something. Give me an order." "Midoriya, what are you? Please, just do it." It was such an unreal experience that it had taken Aizawa a few precious seconds to realize what was going on. They had hoped he'd recovered from it after all the treatments and talks he'd been given. As a teacher, he should have known just because the signs were invisible didn't mean they weren't there. Aizawa did what he was told. "Midoriya, please sit down." A flip switched in Izuku's head. His eyes glazed over suddenly, his body going rigid as he followed the command immediately. Once he was sitting, it took several seconds for his eyes to go from looking far away to clearing back up. When they did clear back up, he looked ashamed. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Sensei." "I didn't." He closed his eyes tightly, his lower lip wobbling, but still no tears escaped him. Forcing himself to unclench his fists in anger, the homeroom teacher made to comfort the boy. What else could he do during a time like this? There was no point in making a promise of it getting better. It would be as good as lying to the boy. Everyone was in the dark about the situation. Izuku-centric was a noumu now, plain and simple, but he was unlike any noumu they had information on. He was an anomaly. Still, he was human too. Just a boy. "Don't worry about it, kid. We'll figure something out. Did you know you'd have an attack coming, or was it sudden?" "I think I felt it start stirring in my head 10 minutes ago. But it hadn't happened like that in so long I'd forgotten the feeling. It only really became bad when my muscles started itching for something to do, and my head started hurting. It felt like something other than myself was getting ready to panic. But..." He trailed off for a moment before whispering, "I think that was still me. We'll have to come up with a code word or phrase for when you get that urge again. Do you know how often that happens?" "I'm not sure. Once a day maybe. Sometimes it's twice a day. But a few times it's none at all." For a phrase, did you have anything in mind? If not, I think I have an idea." "And what's that?" "What do you need from me?" Izawa seemed hesitant. "That's a bit too common of a question, isn't it?" "Not really. I usually ask, what can I do for you? So having, what do you need from me? Be the phrase will mean if we're ever in a public situation, it would be casual enough to not sound too strange. Also, it's something easy for the rest of the class and teachers to know in case that happens again." And so it was decided. The concern about having been ordered into passing on one for all was also cleared up rather early on. Izuku explaining their tactic hadn't worked since he wasn't passing it unwillingly despite acting as if he was. That had been a relief for everyone involved. The villains wouldn't be able to get their hands on that sort of power anytime soon. That is, as long as Izuku never received an order from Shigaraki. For a class full of heroes in training, it was a wonder no one put all the pieces together beforehand. Izuku-centric was many things. He was intelligent, hard-working, passionate, kind-hearted, and loyal for starters. While he did have a few habits that tended to weird others out, such as the mumbling and analyzing every quirk or hero around him before putting it in his notebooks. His relationships with his classmates, save Bakugo, were all positive ones. He genuinely cared about helping others just for the sake of helping, making people smile, and keeping them safe top among his other ideals as an aspiring hero. On the other hand, there were things his classmates overlooked. If someone asked their homeroom teacher about said problem child, one of the first words to come out of his mouth would be reckless. The boy was too quick to make decisions that would end in him getting hurt. His self-sacrificing mindset was only one problem though. Among other traits, Izuku had an extraordinarily low self-esteem. One would think someone singled out by All Might himself would at least have some confidence in himself, which he did show from time to time. But it was obvious years of being put down normalized a low self-worth in his mind. There was also the nervousness he displayed when people got too close to his face or touched him suddenly. His abnormally high pain tolerance, overactive tear ducts, sometimes stuttered speech, aversion to yelling, and more. All of these displays were passed off as part of his overall personality. Here come the waterworks again. Classic Midoriya. "Dude, your arm is purple and your leg is bleeding. Why did you keep fighting instead of going to see Recovery Girl right away? That has to hurt. Sorry, Deku. I didn't mean to startle you." They couldn't have been more naive. How else could they explain missing the obvious signs blaring at them for the past several months? Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, and Kirishima were especially ashamed. The former three were Izuku's closest friends. Kirishima was Bakugo's out of those who called themselves the Baka Squad. The redhead still liked to think he was close enough to Izuku to know what his friend was going through. In the end, however, it seemed everyone in Class 1A was woefully inexperienced. The observations had begun to rack up during the first few days of living in the dormitory. Observation #1. Izuku hated loud noises, especially yelling. "Come on, Bakugo, can't you take a little break from studying to play the latest Super Smash Heroes game that just came out? Kaminari got it today, and there are a bunch of new playable characters." The explosive blonde returned Kirishima's enthusiastic shout with his own angry ones. "First of all, hair for brains. I only play as All Might, so I couldn't care less about them adding Morning Wood or Mount Ass to the list of playable characters. Secondly, I'm not studying. I just don't feel like hanging out with anyone right now. Third and finally, stop pestering me. Go bother someone else. But we want you to play, he whined obnoxiously, earning a few snickers from some of the other students in the lounge. Please? I said no. Please? No. Please. Go away. Pretty please with chili powder on top. Letting out an enraged scream, Bakugo launched himself out of his chair and tackled Kirishima to the floor. While Ada quickly went to break them up, Tsuyu couldn't help but point out something she'd noticed during the entire exchange. Midoriya, she questioned from where she sat with him at the next table over. The brunette looked up from his notes innocently. Yes, Tsu-chan? I don't know if you noticed, Ribbit, but you were covering your ears a moment ago. Oh, I guess I was. Yeah, they were being kind of loud, she gestured to Bakugo and Kirishima. Which is usual, so I was wondering if you had a headache or something. I have some earplugs upstairs if your ears are sensitive right now. Izuku's eyes widened momentarily at the offer before he quickly opted for acting sheepish instead. Oh, I don't have a headache or anything. I'm just used to it being quiet outside of school. I was so at ease here that when they suddenly began yelling it caught me off guard. He found himself biting his lip. I don't really enjoy loud noises, he admitted, shouting especially. Our classmates shout a lot though. They do, but it's usually in class or during a hero course activity. I expected more in those settings. There's also nothing I can do but endure in those situations. When I'm at home though, I like being able to relax. Loud noises kind of make that hard, you know? Tsuyu nodded. I understand. Observation #2. Izuku hated it when people snuck up on him. Midori, Hagakure greeted, an invisible hand coming down on his shoulder just as he was made aware of her presence. While she was wearing her pajamas Aka, not entirely invisible, she was still light on her feet. Nearly jumping out of his skin, Izuku had to rein in his quirk before he accidentally hit someone. He still screamed rather loudly though. Immediately the girl apologized, the hand on his shoulder falling back to her side slowly. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to sneak up on you. I'm fine, Hagakure-kun, the brunette assured. A shaking hand running through his curls said otherwise. You just surprised me was all. There's no harm done. Are you sure? Why, yeah. Anyway, see you later. Hagakure watched as he walked away, completely forgetting what she'd been about to ask him. All she could think about was the slight trembling of his fists as he turned the corner. Observation #3. Izuku had an unnaturally high pain tolerance. It was during an intense training exercise his classmates saw something that shook them. Koda, watch out. All Might's warning from the communicator fell on deaf ears. The quiet student could only gaze up at the building about to collapse in horror. With the way Bakugo's explosions had blown out the supports, it was already beginning to topple down upon him. There was no way for him to run out of the way of danger in time. Throwing his arms above his head for some semblance of protection, Koda squeezed his eyes shut. Was he going to die? Koda. The screaming of his name was paired with two steel-plated shoes coming in contact with his side. Koda let out a gasp of pain. He was definitely going to be bruised later, as he was shot clear across the terrain. In the span of a couple seconds he was far enough away from the falling building to be out of danger. The scrapes and bruises forming from being kicked out of the way, nothing recovery girl couldn't fix. Izuku, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. All Koda and his classmates in the observation room could do was watch as the green of the boy's hero costume was buried underneath gray concrete and dust. Midoriya, All Might's communicator, was met with static from Izuku's channel. At that point the exercise, which had been called off as soon as the structure of the building began to wobble, turned into the teacher ordering the students to run down to the exercise location to assist in unburying his student. The pro hero made a note to have a serious discussion with Bakugo later. However, when the students and teacher reached the area, they were met with the sight of Izuku, holding tons of concrete and twisted metal above him. His body sparked with his quirk's brilliant white lightning as he made to push himself up from the kneeling position he was stuck in. But it appeared he was at his limit. In an instant, All Might ran to his student's aid. On account of his skeletal form, he forced himself to wait, while Kirishima, Sato, and Shoji began hauling the rock above Izuku off of him. Mina helped by melting some of the rock with her acid. Uraraka ran over to touch as much rock as she could so it would be easier to throw out of the way. Ojiro, and a few other students taking hold of the now limited weight Izuku was struggling to hold and lifting it up easily. This allowed the brunette to let go and promptly fall forward in exhaustion. The teacher was proud that a moment later Oita was there to retrieve his friend, Todoroki helping by creating more support via his ice. so the structure would not fall right away when the other students let go of it. Midoriya, Ida spoke as he laid him down gently where their classmates now crowded around them. Tell me where you're hurt. Izuku blinked slowly, his head throbbing from where the back of it had hit the concrete before he was able to lift it up in a burst of strength. His entire body screamed in anguish, his side and knees sending hot knives of pain to his brain that made him want to sob. He swallowed his tears down though, instead pushing the pain from his mind, so he could focus on making sure if Koda was okay. It took him a couple seconds for him to realize he still had yet to answer his friend's question. It didn't help that he had several pairs of eyes looking at him in worry either. I think I'm okay, he managed to say. His voice was strained. I'm just really tired. What about Koda? Yaoyorozu narrowed her eyes at him seriously. Koda has a few scrapes, but we're far more concerned about you right now. This is not the time to be lying for the sake of making us feel better. Where are you injured? The brunette winced. There was no fooling Yaoyorozu. The back of my head hurts, my knees are bleeding a little, and there's a pain in my left side. Other than that, it's just muscle exhaustion from holding the debris up. Thank you for being honest. I can make some bandages for your knees and head now, and we can bring you to Recovery Girl right away for your head injury. You might have a concussion. Before that, let me see your side. If there's a cut, I want to bandage it. But if it's bruising, there could be cracked or broken ribs in which... Her tangent was cut off when Izuku let out a wheezing breath of pain. Ida had been carefully ripping the side of the injured student's hero costume open since the zipper was caught underneath him, and the suit was already damaged. All he had done was lift the fabric covering his side off the skin. Unfortunately, when he did that, not only did he reveal a large bloody mess, but there was a gaping hole accompanied by what looked like bone sticking out of the glaring red skin of his side. Several students screamed, All Might going pale as he stared at his protege. Even as Izuku looked at the injury, his green eyes staring at it uncomprehendingly, Todoroki was switching places with Ida so he could run off to grab Recovery Girl himself. I promise it looks worse than it is, Izuku stated with an awkward smile. That didn't stop 𝗵𝗃𝗃 from fainting. It is bleeding a lot though. Todoroki-kun, do you mind putting some ice on it? Just until Recovery Girl gets here. Are you sure? He questioned. It will hurt, Midoriya. Probably even more than it does now. Izuku nodded. He was beginning to feel sick, the adrenaline fading from his body. I'm sure. Hurry, please. I don't feel so good. Todoroki steeled himself to carry out the request. Everyone prepared their hearts for a scream, but surprisingly Izuku kept his lips firmly closed as the ice was applied. In fact, he didn't make any sounds of distress, even when he accidentally reacted to the sound of Ada's engines and sat up instinctively. His classmates' cries of concern were met with a weak grin. Izuku had a literal rib sticking outside of his side, yet he was only blinking back tears. Observation #4. Izuku was having nightmares. It was their first movie night as a class when his sleeping habits were brought up. Look, Mina pointed at the couch the three founding members of the Deku Squad, Uraraka, Ida, and Izuku himself were on. Midori's asleep. Beside her, Kaminari craned his neck to see that she was right. Izuku was half sitting up against the couch while his head rested on Uraraka's shoulder. His eyes were shut, his mouth slightly parted as he breathed out of it, and he looked more at peace than ever. Uraraka caught her classmates staring, so she raised a finger to her mouth to shush them while fighting off a blush. Don't be so loud. Let him sleep, okay? That can't be good for his neck though, Sato argued. The brunette rolled her eyes. He'll be fine for a little while. I'll wake him up when everyone else heads upstairs. I agree, Ida added. Midoriya seems to have had trouble sleeping since we moved into the dorms earlier this week, so it is best he sleeps when he can. Kirishima tiled his head in confusion. He's having trouble sleeping? Did he tell you that? Or did you just guess? I don't think Ida really had to guess, Tsuyu commented. Midoriya has probably not talked about it, but it is obvious. He's been getting drowsy in class, his eyes are starting to get bags underneath them, and he's always awake before anyone else. The redhead frowned. I just thought he was doing some extra training in the morning. I think he's been having nightmares, 𝗵𝗃𝗃 stated casually. His other floor mates, Takoyami and Aoyama, sent displeased looks towards the shorter boy. What? I get you two might not have wanted to rat him out or whatever, but you both know as well as I do that something's keeping him up at night. I should know. I'm up all night for a normal reason. He winked at a few of the girls, who merely glared at him. Takoyami sighed. He is seen to be getting up throughout the night. I wish to keep my observations to myself for his own privacy, but perhaps he does need support. He was in the kitchen the other morning around 2. And I'm pretty sure he's already out of his room by 6 when I wake up. He was showering last night at 3, Shoji admitted. I only noticed because I woke up to get a drink. Aoyama threw a hand in the air dramatically. I'm pretty sure I've woken up from my beauty rest once already because I heard him scream. Poor boy. At this, many of the classmates looked at the sleeping Izuku in alarm. Even Bakugo held himself back from snapping at everyone to stop talking and watch the movie. There was a twinge of concern that curled in his gut like a stomachache. He wouldn't dare let anyone else know that, though. Should we bring this up to him? Uraraka found herself turning to Ida for advice. I mean, he might not feel comfortable talking about it. But I don't want him to stay like this. If there's something we can do to help him, Ida hummed in thought, his eyes drifting over the soft rise and fall of his sleeping friend's chest. Perhaps we can turn in for the night, a bit earlier than the 10 o'clock curfew. Even if we do not go to bed, we can return to our rooms earlier, or lightly suggest he get some sleep. This way we can do something while also giving him the time he needs to approach one of us about what he is going through. Simply asking him about his sleeping troubles might make him uncomfortable. It would be best to wait for him to bring it up to us. However, should the situation get worse, then we will step in. Uraraka nodded. Great idea, Ida. Operation Help Deku-kun Rest Easy is now in effect. Suddenly an annoyed clearing of the throat was heard. Now that you losers are done yapping, Bakugo ground out at a normal volume. Would you just watch the damn movie? Observation #5. Izuku flinched a lot. Mina sat with her back up against a tree, breathing heavily. It had been her idea for the class to have a picnic outside, since it was such a beautiful day. Their first weekend living at UA, having been blessed with great weather. A relaxing lunch had turned into intense games of Red Rover tag, and now Frisbee courtesy of Yaoyorozu. After playing hard for nearly 2 hours, the pink-skinned girl was forcing herself to take a break. She'd worked herself into such a sweat, she feared she'd start perspiring acid instead. Who would have thought Frisbee could count as high-intensity exercise? Stretching languidly, her eyes flickered to the greenette, sitting adjacent to her on the very same tree trunk. He had opted out of playing not too long before her. For the past 10 minutes or so he had been scribbling in his latest hero journal, the site a common one. It seemed he hadn't even noticed her presence, he was so concentrated on his writing. Her eyes moved to his hair. Since coming to UA, he'd yet to cut his curls, the unruly things growing out of control as the months passed. While they looked adorable on him, Mina wondered when he was planning on getting a trim. Surely he didn't want hair in his eyes. That would only impede his vision, so it made sense he'd cut it at some point. I'm great at cutting hair, she thought to herself cheerfully. We even have similar hairstyles. I could totally help him out. A smile split her face as she prepared to ask the question. However, instead of verbally getting his attention, she allowed herself to be a little silly and reached towards her friend's head. She wanted to see if his hair was as soft as others made guys' hair out to be. The tips of her fingers brushed against the back of his neck in preparation of going up the back of his head. She halted in her movements, though when Izuku stilled at her touch, his entire body going taut at the sensation of fingers on his neck. Sorry if I startled you, Midori. Mina quickly found herself saying. At the sound of her voice, his shoulders slumped slightly, the tension beginning to fade over the next few seconds. It's fine, came the false cheery response. The stutter gave him away though. Why are you touching my neck? Having noticed she'd yet to move her hand, she finally threaded her fingers through his hair experimentally. It didn't last long though, because she could tell by looking at her friend that he was tensing up again. She didn't need to see his face to know he was uncomfortable. Your hair looked soft, so I wanted to touch it, she admitted as she brought her hand back. I should have asked first, huh? Well, I really don't mind. I was just distracted. You can touch my hair if you want to, he said the last sentence more softly. Mina blinked at him slowly, but of course he was avoiding her eyes. There were a few seconds where neither of them moved. It was only after enough time had passed that Izuku looked over his shoulder quizzically that the girl lifted her arm. She watched in fascination as he tracked her hand like it was a potential enemy until it rested atop his head. What was he expecting her to do to him to look too apprehensive? Kaken and I were childhood friends, she suddenly recalled him saying. We had a falling out after he developed his quirk though. One thing led to another, and he ended up treating me the way he does now. He seems like he really hates your guts, Kaminari commented. Izuku shook his head. It feels like it sometimes, but I don't think that's it. I for one really admire him. Even if he was really cruel to me growing up, even if he still winds up taking his emotions out on me, I hope we can be proper rivals someday soon. One thing he'd said replayed in her mind. Even if he was really cruel to me, Bakugo wouldn't have bullied him, hurt him that badly, right? Part of Mina twisted with sadness at her own answer. A sigh brought her out of her thoughts. She found herself smiling as she took in the sight of Izuku with his eyes closed and head tilted in unconcealed bliss. Her fingers glided through his curls tenderly in a way a mother would play with her child's hair. Mina could tell by the soft, relaxed smile on his face that unlike earlier he was actually enjoying the touch now. When he began to lean into her touch, she began to wonder how long it had been since he'd simply had his hair played with. Or maybe it had been a long time since he'd received such a non-aggressive form of touch in general. She continued playing with his hair as he dozed off. The fact he felt safe enough in her presence to rest making her lip wobble with emotion. None of their classmates in the clearing bothered them, even as the afternoon turned into evening. Observation #6. Izuku disliked bullies. He had no idea who this guy's name was, but he knew for a fact his anger level was just under Bakugo's on a relatively average day. "You're in class 1, right?" The nameless boy all but screamed at him. Around them, students Izuku didn't recognize watched the scene play out in silence. They were on the first floor far away, where the hero course classrooms were on the second floor. And that thought made Izuku wish he'd waited to stop by the library that morning. The greenette gulped back his fear, instead putting on his usual friendly smile. "Why, yes, I am. My name's Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you." He stuck out his hand for a handshake, but the stranger sneered at him. Pathetic. What was the school board on when they chose someone so spineless to get into their hero program? "You're almost as bad as that puny grape kid." Izuku felt his fists clenching. Don't talk bad about 𝗵𝗃𝗃 when you don't know him. Some people in the crowd made noises of surprise, the sounds making the angry boy in front of Izuku even more pissed off. "Talking down to me, huh? That's all you hero course students do anyway. Thanks to one of your classmates getting kidnapped, everyone here was more or less forced to move into the dorms here if they wanted to stay in school. Thanks to you guys, I can only see my family for 1 day a week. The school's under fire again too. Just what do you have to say for yourself, huh? I for one think you owe everyone affected an apology." As he was yelling this, he'd shoved Izuku into the wall, both hands balling up the front of his uniform as he glared hatefully into the greenette's eyes. At the feeling of being manhandled, the feeling so similar to what he'd felt his entire childhood, he felt his breathing pick up. Almost unconsciously his quirk activated. Seeing the telltale signs of a quirk lightning-like light visibly coursing through his body, the bully let go of him with a snarl. "What, are you so above me that you just resort to using your quirk, then apologizing to your peers?" Izuku instantly shut off one for all at the mention, the activation not having been his choice in the first place. "You don't even belong in the hero program. Everyone knows you only got in because you were born with a power greater than you deserved. A loser like you doesn't have what it takes to be a hero. So you should just, excuse me, but what the hell do you think you're doing?" The stranger turned around to order the newcomer to back off. But unfortunately he noticed who the newcomer was too late to stop himself from speaking. Teaching him a moment later he was sent off to the principal's office to explain what he'd just been doing. The purple-haired brainwasher telling everyone else in the hallway to get a move on too, unless they wanted to be ordered away. Once most students had gone their own way, 𝗫𝗪 let his eyes rove over the disheveled hero student before him. His breathing was faster than usual, but thankfully it didn't look like he'd been sent into a panic attack. Midoriya. In an instant Izuku was looking up instead of at the floor. 𝗫𝗪 could tell he was a bit shaken up after the encounter, which made him frown. He had more than enough power to make any bully back off. Why hadn't he stood up for himself? 𝗫𝗪, thank you for doing what you did." He let out a shaky laugh. "I don't even know who he is, but he seemed to really dislike me because of my class. He caught me so off guard, I really didn't know what to tell him in order to make him feel better. So you just let him berate you instead. The least you could have done was stand up for yourself. I don't like using my quirk outside of quirk or no quirk, you can always stand up for yourself." 𝗫𝗪 cut him off. "So why didn't you? We can discuss it on the walk to the second floor." Izuku frowned. "But aren't your classes on this floor?" "Sure, but after that I think I'd rather make sure you get to your classmates safely. We've got plenty of time until the bell anyway." "Oh, well, thank you." They began walking down the hallway together as he continued. "Anyway, about your question earlier, I sort of have a hard time standing up to bullies. I'm going to cut you off there. You stood up to me before, didn't you? Throwing me over the line during the sports festival sure felt like it." The greenette chuckled. "Maybe, but that was different. At school I was used to being treated harshly. Since I was 4 years old I'd been on the receiving end of name-calling, taunts, manhandling, physical violence, you name it. At first I tried to stop them, tried to fight them off. But I either ended up getting yelled at by teachers for telling them or hurt by the people I was trying to defend myself against. It's all just whatever to me now. It had been so long since I've had to think about standing up for myself to anyone besides Kaken that when that guy came up just to start shouting at me, I just sort of found myself shutting down and preparing for the worst. I hate bullies, but I would rather me be the target than someone else. Shinso gazed at the shorter boy, scrutinizing him. For what it's worth, he began as he escorted the other student up the stairs. That guy back there shouldn't have grabbed or yelled at you like that. I shouldn't have been a jerk to you back during the sports festival either. It's wrong for anyone to start wailing on someone because they're frustrated at the world and decide to take it out on someone who may or may not be related to what they're mad or upset about. That means you'll need to do more than simply get used to critics and jerks of the world, Midoriya. You'll need to be able to show them their preconceived prejudices are ill-placed and incorrect. He took a breath before continuing. I admire your heroic passion, you know. Your character is what will make you a great hero one day. That strong quirk of yours, now that you've got a handle on it, is just a bonus. But before you can be a hero to others, shouldn't you be a hero to yourself too? Izuku was left speechless as they arrived outside the door to Class 1A. Anyway, see you around, Midoriya. The purple-haired boy was almost out of earshot by the time he got a response. See you later, Shinso-kun. Observation #7. Izuku often apologized for things that weren't his fault. It happened just before curfew one weekday. Zero, could you grab the milk from the fridge for me, please? There should be half a gallon left. Sure thing. Sato, you already got the cookies? Right here. You're happy to have some if you'd like. Don't mind if I do. Let me grab some cups and I'll… Zero broke off with a grunt as he spun into Izuku, who had just walked through the doorway the same time as Zero stepped into it. With a yelp of surprise from the greenette, the trio in the kitchen winced as the milk gallon and ceramic plate hit the floor. The plastic container broke open upon contact, and the plate shattered loudly. Instantly, Zero and Izuku were stepping away from the wet, sharp mess, Shoji running in from the living room since he'd heard the sound. Well, this sucks, Zero said sadly. That was all the milk we had, and I managed to break a plate. Sorry about that, Sato. It's no big deal. My cookies are delicious with or without milk. The tape-wielding hero in training nodded before turning to Izuku to apologize for running into him. However, he couldn't help but have noticed the way the greenette had put his arms up in defense when the items had fallen. Only now was he slowly lowering them, his bottom lip wobbling slightly as he looked at the mess. I'm so sorry, Izuku stuttered. If I hadn't walked in, you wouldn't have dropped that. I'll go get something to clean this up with right away. Midoriya, Sato stopped him in his tracks with the sound of his voice. Shoji is already on it. Zero and I will clean it up, no problem. Yeah, I was the one who wasn't being careful, Zero assured. I literally walked backwards without looking, so I'm sorry for running into you. Izuku's eyes darted between the two like he wasn't sure if they were being truthful. It wasn't until Shoji walked in a second later that he spoke. Okay, but I'd still feel better if you let me help you clean up. I'd rather do it, actually. Shoji suddenly cut in. With my quirk, I can extend my arms out to safely clean up the shards. It's no trouble for me at all as long as I can snag a cookie on my way out. Sato grinned. Thanks, dude, and no problem. I made 2 dozen. Even as the mess was being cleaned up, Izuku found himself feeling terrible. How could he not be partially to blame when he'd walked into Zero, making him waste the rest of his classmates' milk and breaking a plate? If this were Bakugo's house, he would have been pummeled by now. How could he have been so clumsy? Midoriya. Someone tapped his shoulder, and Izuku flinched. Why, yes. Zero frowned, his face showing concern as he looked into the greenette's eyes. It's really not a big deal. No use crying over spilled milk and a broken plate, you know? I'm not crying. Yeah, but you still don't need to look too crestfallen. Cheer up. Come on, grab some of Sato's cookies. They're chocolate chip, Shoji added. Highly recommend. After a few seconds debating the offer, Izuku finally nodded. He stepped around Zero and Shoji to take the cookie Sato held out for him. A moment later, his face was lit up with delight after taking a bite of the creation. Wow, Sato-kun, your baking skills are amazing as ever. I guess with your quirk being Sugar Rush, it makes sense that you'd… The trio smiled as he went off on a tangent about the quirk. They were all happy to see him smiling once again. Observation #8. Izuku was self-conscious of his appearance. Whoa man, that scar is from the training camp, Kaminari observed Izuku's arm in awe. They were in the locker room, so it was easy to see the huge scar on the greenette's upper arm and shoulder. That looks like it must have hurt. It's so ugly. 𝗵𝗃 Ida scolded, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 among a few others sending disapproving looks at the blonde. The electric quirk user seemed to realize his mistake, even before Ida scolded him for his lack of etiquette. That was seriously rude of me, 𝗵𝗃 said quickly. I didn't mean for it to come out like that, Midoriya. I'm so sorry. I just mean it looks out of place on you, you know? You don't deserve to have a crude scar like that on you so early. We're not even out of school yet, and you're already littered in them. A monotone voice broke in then, a blast of cold air hitting the boys in the locker room out of nowhere. Bringing up people's scars in front of others is not respectful. Calling them ugly is even more discourteous, and I would ask you not do something like this again. If you have a comment about such a topic, I would recommend you do it in private, or not at all. Todoroki's dual-colored gaze burned into the blonde before the boy left the locker room without another word. Most others who were dressed followed his lead, the only exception being Ojiro, who was standing next to an embarrassed-looking Izuku. Midoriya, he spoke kindly as the other quickly put on the rest of his hero outfit. I don't think what 𝗵𝗃 said was okay, but I think he meant that you are too nice a guy to have been hurt like that. What he doesn't understand is that scars show what pain we've overcome. He still sees them as a fresh wound, a reminder of the pain you must have felt when you received it. It's ugly to him because it reminds him you were hurt. I don't think he really thinks it's ugly, or that you're ugly, okay? Izuku was still frowning. But it is ugly, isn't it? Just like my crooked hand after the sports festival. They are a reminder, sure, but that doesn't mean they aren't gross to look at. Ojiro sighed. Do you think Todoroki is ugly? The greenette looked at him like he'd suggested 𝗫𝗫 was a great father. No, he's actually the most attractive guy in the class according to the girls. Personally, his scar is completely superficial. What matters is not the beauty of his face, but the kind person he is on the inside. Izuku trailed off with cheeks pink as he got the picture. See? Ojiro smiled while giving him a thumbs up. You're an attractive guy yourself, you know. Scars and all. Izuku smiled. Thank you, Ojiro-kun. That means a lot. No problem. You believe me then? Of course. Good. You shouldn't think about yourself so negatively. Anyway, let's head outside. I heard we're doing more rescue training today. The two left together, part of Ojiro wondering if he'd imagined the lack of sincerity in Izuku's voice when he'd answered just a moment ago. Observation #9. Izuku didn't have the best childhood. It had started with an innocent bout of storytelling. After 𝗵𝗃 mentioned the news that Universal Studios Japan got a new ride, Hagakure brought up the time she snuck into an amusement park in junior high. If the lines were too long, I would just jump into the open seats of the rides. Gyro nodded appreciatively. That's hardcore. That's illegal, Ida reprimanded. 𝗵𝗃 waved their class rep off. Don't tell me you've never done something illegal with your quirk. The blue-haired boy gasped, affronted. Of course not. I come from a family of heroes, so taking part in such villainous activities would be a slander to the Ida name. Todoroki stared at him. You tried going after the hero killer on your own. Well, that was illegal 𝗧𝗪𝗏 sang. While Ida pouted, Koda whispered something to Gyro. You guys have got to hear this, the music lover said with a grin. Koda here told me he once talked all of the bunnies in a pet shop into climbing out of their enclosure and following him home. Apparently he really wanted a pet bunny at the time, and when his mom said no, he tried bringing them along instead. The employees caught him just as he and his mom got out the door. Everyone was shocked that the quiet, sweet Koda would have done something like that. They were even more surprised when Yaoyorozu raised her hand in the air like she was preparing to answer a question in class. I have to admit to something as well. Because of my quirk, I can create anything I know the chemical makeup of to a certain degree. I was making gifts for one of my etiquette instructors when I was around 6 years old, which wouldn't have been that big of an ordeal. But I was so young, I didn't understand how such a quirk could affect the economy. I just wanted to make her jewelry. It turns out after making her a golden necklace with various gems in it, she asked if I could produce gold bars, which I did without thinking anything of because she was so happy. It wasn't until she was arrested on account of illegal quirk use that I realized creating any form of currency, precious metals included, was not legal except for very limited circumstances. Of course, I didn't get in too much trouble since I wasn't aware I was doing something wrong, but stories continued to be passed around for some time. And to Izuku's dismay, he forgot himself at one point in the conversation. Kaken destroyed a lot of school property throughout the years with his quirk, he added with a smile when Kirishima asked him what illegal things Bakugo did. Even when he was just 4, he used it to trespass areas too, blowing the locks to gates open and stuff. He honestly broke the no using quirks in public law nearly every day. The class is full of delinquents, Ida cried dramatically. After wallowing in despair for a couple seconds, he turned his attention to Izuku looking hopeful. You've never broken the law, the stain encounter aside, correct? Izuku frowned. I was a late bloomer, so I never had the chance to break the law with it. And not that I would have. Minato leaned forward with a lecherous grin. Oh really? Well, Midoriya, even if you didn't break the law back in the day, you must have gotten into some kind of trouble in junior high. Tell me, did you sneak into the girls' locker room? Flip skirts? Steal panties? Minato-kun, he reprimanded, aghast. That's extremely disrespectful. I've never done something like that, and never will. Not like he had any friends to do something shitty like that with anyway. Bakugo grumbled offhandedly from where he sat on the couch. The greenette laughed off the comment. It was the only way to push away how much the truth of it hurt. Kakin's right about that. Uraraka became upset at the notion they were implying. What are you talking about? You had to have some friends, even if Bakugo was being his prickly self at that time. Hey, Izuku ran a hand through his hair sheepishly, ignoring the blonde. I wasn't very popular, Uraraka-chan. Since my quirk developed super late, everyone including myself assumed I was quirkless. Not many people wanted to associate with someone like that. Aoyama made a noise of concern. People are cruel to the quirkless this day and age, are they not? It must have been tough. The smile on Izuku's face faltered for just a moment. Yeah, he finally responded. Just a little bit. Observation #10 Izuku. Expected people to hurt him. Dinner finished not too long before the most painstakingly obvious sign something was wrong occurred. Hagakure and Ojiro were doing one of their weekly chores, which consisted of washing and drying the dishes used that night. Everyone else collectively decided to carry out their usual Thursday evening routines in the common area on the first floor. The school day having been a fairly lax one that left several students in sociable moods. Some like Koda, Sato, Shoji, and Takoyami were studying or doing homework for ectoplasm's class the next day at the tables. Others like Yaoyorozu and Todoroki were reading books for fun on one of the couches. Mina, Kaminari, Minato, and Shiro were engaged in an intense game of Candyland. Jiro lied back in an armchair listening to her music. Ida and Uraraka sat up on the floor in front of her going over past assignments in order to study for the test they would have Monday. Bakugo was doing something similar with Kirishima, while Aoyama chatted with Tsuyu about different moisturizers to keep her skin from drying out on drier days. This left Izuku to read the latest quirk encyclopedia he'd picked up at the library earlier that evening in peace. Well, that was until Kirishima pointed out to Bakugo that he'd gotten a question wrong on their last hero law quiz. It was the only question I got wrong, shitty hair. Said explosive blonde growled at his friend. Just look the stupid law up on your phone if you want to know the answer so badly. I'm sure it's not important enough to be on the test anyway, since he never grills us for the gritty details on stuff like this. Come on, Bakugo. Doesn't it bug you knowing you only got one question wrong? Nope. Well, it bugs me. I'll go ask Midoriya what the answer is, since hero law is his strongest subject. Bakugo narrowed his eyes at the mention of the greenette. Before he could protest though, Kirishima was already pushing himself up off the floor. Full of energy as always, he practically jumped across the room shouting Izuku's name. He would have barreled right into the shorter boy, if not for tripping over Kaminari. But the damage was already done. Izuku heard his name being yelled, his body instantly tensing at the loud noise, as well as the sound of rapidly approaching feet. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a hand coming towards his face, not unlike that of one about to sting him across his cheek. His breath caught in his throat at the shock of being attacked, while surrounded by people he usually felt safe with. Even as Kirishima fell and the hand dropped out of view, Izuku couldn't hold back the violent flinch that overtook him. A second later, his book fell onto the floor as he threw his arms over his head protectively. He curled into himself then, not looking up even as several eyes turned towards him due to the commotion Kirishima caused. He was trembling, head down, despite Kirishima now standing before him looking incredibly guilty. The redhead had known the greenette's childhood school life hadn't exactly been pleasant, but watching his friend trying desperately to make himself smaller, just to get away from him, sent a pang of sadness through his heart. Midoriya? He tried. A few others watching the scene in confusion or worry. Todoroki's heterochromatic eyes followed every movement Kirishima made. Buddy, I didn't mean to scare you. I wasn't going to hit you or anything. I'm sorry if it looked like I was. Izuku slowly uncurled, his large green eyes filled with such vulnerability and anguish Kirishima's mouth was pulled into a frown. However, when he noticed everyone else around watching, Izuku quickly sat up and rubbed a hand across the back of his neck with an awkward laugh. There was a casual, fake mask thrown up over his face that screamed he was pretending nothing had happened. "Sorry about that, Kirishima-kun. You took me by surprise is all." From the couch adjacent to him, Yaoyorozu raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're okay, Midoriya? You seem to think he was about to hit you." Kaminari made a noise of agreement. "Yeah, dude, and you know Kirishima wouldn't hurt a fly outside of hero training." Izuku nodded, a false smile in place as eyes remained trained on him. "I'm fine. I was just distracted, really. Anyway, I think I'm just going to head to my room for now. I need a notebook from there so I can work on my hero analysis." Completely forgetting about his question, Kirishima watched as his friend grabbed the book off of the ground and left the common room. After nearly a minute passed, Todoroki suddenly rose from his seat on one of the couches. "Bakugo," he stated with poorly concealed anger. "What the hell was that?" The blonde in question shrugged, pretending he hadn't taken his eyes off of his notes to watch the scene in the first place. "I don't know what you're talking about, half and half." Luckily, Kirishima was just as upset as Todoroki. "Bakugo, I'm with Todoroki on this one. You're Midoriya's childhood friend. Do you have any idea why he acted like I was about to pummel him?" His voice shook with guilt. He looked so scared. "Man, I don't want to see him like that again. Especially not because of me." The remorse in his voice transferred to Bakugo, who clenched a fist in frustration. He hated when the past he tried hard to forget was brought up. On the other hand, he hated it even more when Kirishima was unhappy. The redhead was his closest friend, not including his weird relationship with Midoriya. Aware the rest of the class was listening in at this point, he lit a small explosion before ordering none of them to act too rashly. "The nerd was picked on a lot growing up. He had no friends after he pissed me off when we were 4. So until he came here, all he had was his mom, because of his stupid dream of being a hero. While at the time believing he was quirkless, he was bullied constantly. Came home with new injuries nearly every day," he commented nonchalantly. It was as if he was pointedly ignoring the horrified looks on his classmates' faces. "Why didn't you stop them?" Ida questioned accusingly. As an aspiring hero, you would have known that sort of brutish behavior was not something to be ignored. Bakugo grunted, but just as he was about to answer, Uraraka cut him off. "He didn't stop anyone from hurting him because he helped bully Deku-kun." Kirishima came to the rescue immediately. "Now Uraraka, I get that they fight a lot. But I don't think she's right, hair for brains. Stop defending me when you don't know a fraction of the crap I've done." He sighed, red eyes smoldering as they remained glued to the ground. "I was an even bigger asshole when I was younger than I am now, okay? I beat the shit out of Deku on a weekly basis. I antagonized him daily, made sure no one would be his friend, and said a couple things to him even someone like me regrets. My mom heard it from his mom one day that he's got anxiety when it comes to touch. Touch starved along with some other bullshit I know nothing about. All I know is that if someone looks like they're going to hurt him somewhere, he's supposed to be safe at 𝗏. That sounds like a type of PTSD, Ida whispered worriedly. After a minute of silence, Bakugo continued in a more subdued manner. "Look, don't start treating him like he's made of glass because of this. Deku is one of the strongest people I know," he admitted despite the fact it looked like it pained him to do so. "He won't want you pitying him or belittling him after that. If you want to help him, then be your annoyingly friendly selves." Bakugo wasn't off the hook. He was far from it, Kirishima vowing to have a long discussion with his friend behind closed doors. Those in the Baka squad were thinking along a similar line, and those close to Izuku retired for the night in order to research more about their friend's conditions and brainstorm ways to help him. Todoroki, for one, found himself calling his sister for advice. Izuku had saved him once. He wanted nothing more than to return the favor, even if all he could do was help even the tiniest bit. For the most part, the incident passes without too much fanfare. Nobody treats Izuku very differently, although everyone is more cautious of their movements in the dormitory the following morning, and nothing else has happened to alert his classmates of anything being wrong. Something Todoroki did notice, though, were the scars Izuku had littering his body. In the men's changing room, everyone usually talked casually or averted eyes while switching into or out of their hero uniform. Eyes didn't linger on another person's form. It would be seen as rude to some, and to others a breach of privacy. Today, however, Todoroki couldn't help but stare at Izuku. Is that a burned scar his shoulder? Those scratches along his side look like they came from nails. The marks on his stomach look like he fell on top of a thorn bush rather harshly. Has he always had these many scars? He turned to Bakugo, who was listening to something Kaminari was saying. "I'm going to help him," he found himself whispering as he pushed past the blonde. "Everything you've helped create, I vow to undo it. Just watch me." With helpful advice coming from not only his sister, but his mother too, Todoroki set off on spending more time with his friend. To be completely fair, it wasn't just him reaching out to Izuku. After what Bakugo had informed the class, they were all doing little things to help their classmate. Mostly it was just showing Izuku that he could trust them. Not that he didn't trust them already, because he did to a certain extent. But trusting them with his life was different than trusting them individually in any day-to-day situation. And with Bakugo, there was more damage to their relationship than could be mended at the flip of a coin. Things were changing though, that much was obvious. It was because of Todoroki's drive to spend more time together with his friend that he was the primary witness to what was occurring. To the dual quirk user, the slow but beautiful metamorphosis that Izuku underwent was the most heartwarming thing he'd ever seen. Izuku was studying with Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki when Kaminari and Kirishima came busting into the lounge roaring with laughter. "Guys," Kaminari yelled while practically skipping with glee. "You'll never guess what we tricked 𝗵𝗃𝗃 into." "Excuse me," Todoroki cut him off with an icy glare. "But could you relay your story a bit quieter? There's no need to yell when we're all right here." The electric quirk user barely needed to look over to register how on edge his screaming had put Izuku. He instantly brushed the observation off in favor for continuing his story at a much more appropriate volume. Kirishima noticed and flashed a thumbs up at Todoroki out of the corner of his gaze. It was something so small, but the little things were adding up. "You know you don't have to sit so far away from me, right?" Izuku raised an eyebrow in confusion as he regarded Tsuyu. The fellow greenette was watching the news with rapt attention, her eyes not straying so see the confusion clear on her friend's face. "What do you mean, Tsu?" "I mean you're all the way at the other end of the couch when you could be sitting next to me." "I wouldn't mind, Ribbit. I usually cuddle up with whoever's around anyway because it keeps me warm." "Oh, okay." For a moment Tsuyu was convinced Izuku would just stay where he was. She could feel his hesitation from where she sat. The way he glanced around the room, nervously to make sure no one was paying any mind to them plain as his appearance. After a few seconds, though, the girl felt the couch dip slightly as Izuku shuffled over to where she was. He settled down next to her so that their legs and arms were touching, going back to watching the news in comfortable silence together for several more minutes. That is until she heard him yawn. "Midoriya-kun," she stated seriously. "Do you trust me?" He seemed startled by the question. "That's a bit random, but of course I do." "Why?" She patted her lap like she was trying to get a skittish cat to jump up onto it. "You seem tired, Ribbit. Since you have the rest of the couch, why don't you rest your head on my lap? I promise it'll be more comfortable than if you fall asleep on my shoulder. I wouldn't want you hurting your neck." Izuku seemed frazzled by the offer. I'm not sure if, are you really okay with that?" "I wouldn't have offered if I wasn't." There was a long pause before Izuku reluctantly relocated himself. The weight of his head settled onto her legs. His face turned towards the television screen, while his arms were brought forward in front of his chest. His knees were bent so that he could curl up on his side more comfortably. Tsuyu let out a small croak of triumph, a small smile on her face as she noticed the tension leaving her friend's shoulders little by little. By the time 15 minutes had passed, his breathing was becoming dangerously slow. Another 5 minutes passed when she realized he still wasn't quite asleep. She gathered he wasn't feeling completely at ease in her presence yet. She knew he wasn't too far away from falling asleep completely though, so she decided it was time to pull out all the stops. "Midoriya-kun?" she whispered. The boy blinked up at her tiredly, eyelids heavy as he struggled to turn his head to look at her. His brilliant green eyes met hers. "Yes, Tsu? If you need me to move, just say the word," he yawned. "I'd be happy to." She shook her head. "That's not it. Do you mind if I touch your face?" His eyes widened at this, a blush ghosting his cheeks. It seemed like he was debating whether or not he should bolt. "Touch my face." "Why?" Tsuyu shrugged. "It's something I do for my siblings when they rest on my lap. It's nice for helping them distress or relax, so they can fall asleep. I thought you wouldn't mind." "Oh, I see. That's fine then," he acquitted. He forced himself to get comfortable once more. Part of him was panicking internally, the entire situation becoming more stressful at the strangeness of it. But all of his anxieties vanished once Tsuyu began touching his face. The soft pads of her fingers met his forehead gently, the foreign sensation not even making him flinch, she was so careful. From there, she moved her fingers down the sides of his face to his temples before massaging lightly. The pleasant sensation put him at ease instantly. He felt like he was melting. After a minute of that, she switched to pressing lightly against the bones that made up his eye sockets. The nerves there responded to the touch by singing happily, Izuku not being able to stifle the sigh of content that escaped him. "Feels good," he slurred, his cheek rubbing against Tsuyu's lap affectionately for a single moment. She took it as a sign of appreciation. "He's like a house cat," she thought to herself. She hummed back as she traced random designs across his face. The two of them stayed like this, even as the news segment she'd been interested in ended, the boy in her lap fast asleep. She merely switched to carding through his hair when Todoroki approached her. "He seems happy," he stated fondly at the scene. Izuku's mouth had slipped open, and he was beginning to drool on the amphibious girl. Tsuyu croaked proudly in response. "What is this?" Izuku found himself mumbling in confusion as he noticed an unlabeled box on his bed. It was out of place for it to be mail from his mom, and frankly, it was a bit odd of a time of year for gifts. The fact the box was unmarked was a bit suspicious. "This is you, though, so I'm sure it's safe. The security is reliable. Does that mean it came from one of my classmates?" Curiosity getting the better of him, Izuku tentatively opened the box to find it filled with notebooks. Upon further inspection, there was also a package of pencils and colored pencils. His emerald eyes shined with excitement. "I wonder who did this. Whoever it was sure is." That's when he noticed it. There, at the very bottom of the box, was a notebook labeled Hero Analysis for the Future 13. 5 in messy scrawl. "Midoriya. We're training with Shinso and Ejiro at 7:30, correct?" Quickly spinning around to face Todoroki, Izuku resigned to figure out what Bakugo meant by gifting him those things later. He needed to help his friend prepare dinner for his weekly task tonight. "Yep, Todoroki-kun. We're going over some gunhead martial arts Uraraka-chan taught Ida and me. What are we making for dinner tonight, by the way?" "I was thinking cold soba." Izuku rolled his eyes. "You always pick that." When Izuku noticed a majority of the girls following him around the dorm, he knew something was up. He started shyly, his fingers twiddling around each other nervously. "Do you guys need something from me? You've been trailing me since class ended. If there's anything I can do to help you, then, can I cut your hair?" Mina cut him off excitedly. He blinked in surprise. "What?" "She wants to cut your hair, dude," Jiraiya repeated. "Your curls are all over the place if you haven't noticed. You're probably well overdue for a trim, and Mina is a pro at cutting hair." Uraraka nodded in agreement. "She's right, Deku-kun. Mina has trimmed mine for me before." "Of course you don't need a haircut if you don't want one," Yaoyorozu confirmed. Hagakure grabbed Izuku's hand tenderly. "Yeah, Momo's right. It's totally your decision after all, but we just wanted to let you know we're totally up for giving you a cute haircut." Izuku looked between the girls' eager faces before a genuine smile broke across his face. "I am in need of haircut," he finally said with a laugh. "It saves my mom and me a trip to the city too. When would you like to do it?" Mina threw a fist into the air. "Let's do it now," the brunette blinked. "Wait, right now. This very instant, Midori. I've been waiting days for this. I have just a haircut in mind." Less than 5 minutes later, he was being seated in the communal bathroom on a literal barbershop chair. It was positioned over one of the open showering areas because, according to the girls, he needed to have his hair thoroughly washed before it was cut. "I could just wet it by dunking under the shower head," he offered. Part of him felt like he was wasting their time or abusing their kindness, but his question was met with a solid denial. "No way, Midori," Hagakure said. "Yeah, Momo did not make this awesome chair for you to not use it. We're going to wash your hair for you like an actual hair cutting place, okay? Just relax." He nodded slowly, resigning himself to his fate. "I'm going to tilt the chair back," Uraraka informed while Jiraiya placed a towel over his front. She tucked in behind his shoulders to catch any excess water, just as Hagakure was turning on the water. Once it was warm, but not scalding, she took the handheld shower head from the top of the shower and gave it to Mina. The pink-skinned girl made sure to warn him before wetting his hair down completely. "The water isn't too hot or cold, right?" Izuku made a noise that meant no. "It's perfect, Mina-kun," she smiled. "Great. I'm going to start working in the shampoo then. It's going to make your hair feel super soft once it's dry." With that, she turned the water off momentarily. After depositing some shampoo onto her hands and rubbing them together so it wasn't as cold, she lathered it into Izuku's scalp with experienced fingers. Uraraka and Yaoyorozu couldn't help but giggle as Izuku's eyes fell closed, and he slumped against the chair happily. "Feels nice, doesn't it?" Mina asked. Izuku nodded in confirmation. "I love having my hair done too for the very same reason. It's a little trickier because of the horns," But everyone loves a good hair washing. I bet even Bakugo would. Izuku laughed. Mina-chan, I don't think Kaken would ever let someone else wash his hair. Do you guys want to know something funny though? If you promise to not let Kaken know I told you, I'll tell you how he dries his hair. It's something only he would do. Dude, spill, Jiraiya along with the other girls begged. Dirt on the explosive blonde was rare, so they wouldn't let this opportunity slip. Since his quirk is explosion, he uses tiny explosions to dry his hair. That's how he really gets his hair so spiky. The girls immediately started freaking out, most of them laughing at the image of Bakugo, using explosions to make what they imagined as limp wet hair into the spiky hairstyle they were used to seeing. That's hilarious, Uraraka giggled. Gyro grinned, agreeing wholeheartedly. Yep, I can totally see him doing that too. Soon after the discussion, Mina switched from washing his hair to rinsing, Uraraka brandishing a brush in order to straighten his wet curls afterwards. Once that was done, Mina started snipping. I'm just going to trim it shorter, okay? I think it'd look cuter if it was a little bit shorter in the back than the length it was when we first started here at U. Though. How do you feel about that? Izuku didn't think for long. That's fine with me. I trust your judgment, Mina-chan, said girl grinned cheerfully. Thank you, I won't let you down, Midori. When all was said and done, Mina was a girl of her word. The girls smiled excitedly as Hagakure and Uraraka walked the boy over to the mirror to see the result. So, Mina sang, do you like it? The brunette touched the short hair at the back of his neck timidly. After a second, his hand ran from the back to the top, where it gradually got longer. The hairstyle was a mix of his original curls with a hint of an undercut, but either way it looked amazing. Mina had some serious skill. It's great, he wound up saying, turning around to face her. Before he knew what he was doing, he was hugging her tightly. Thank you all so much. Mina returned the hug with just as much enthusiasm. It was no problem, Midori. We all had a lot of fun. Let me know the next time you need a trim though, okay? We'd be happy to help again, in exchange for more blackmail on Bakugo. Izuku grinned sheepishly as they pulled away from the hug. His chest felt lighter than it had in ages. Let's show Ida-kun and Todoroki-kun your new haircut, Uraraka said cheerfully, her entire form buzzing in excitement. Nodding, Izuku allowed the brunette to grab his hand and escort him out of the bathroom. His hand felt as warm as his heart. Midoriya. Yes, Todoroki-kun? The dual quirk user gestured towards the front of the dormitory. Our classmates are preparing to leave for an impromptu trip to the arcade. Uraraka sent me to forcibly drag you with, as she put it. Izuku let out a chuckle at that. It very much sounded like the Gravity Girl. Basically everybody is going then? Todoroki nodded. Yes, Ashido challenged Bakugo to something called Dance Dance Revolution, and we all know how well that worked at getting him to come with. Be that as it may, I am curious to go to an arcade seeing, as it will be my first time going to one. Really? It'll be my first time too. I heard they're a lot of fun, and since neither of us have been to one before, we can learn how to play the games together. Izuku's smiles were contagious, Todoroki decided. They had to be for him to feel his own facial muscles pulling upwards at the other boy's energetic grin. I'm really sorry, Midoriya. Kirishima apologized for the umpteenth time. Izuku waved him off, the pain radiating from his back bearable enough for him to hide behind a smile. Don't worry about it, Kirishima-kun. I've taken a lot harder hits than that from Uraraka-chan. They both laughed a bit at that before sobering up. Anyway, I'll see you later tonight at dinner, the redhead grinned. Sure thing. I'll let you study or whatever then, bro. See you later. Once he'd gone, Izuku stared at his closed door for a few seconds, just to make sure the eccentric teenager didn't burst back through them a third time. He'd already done it once, so the brunette wanted to be sure he wouldn't be bothered before getting the medicine box out from underneath his bed. He waited approximately 2 minutes before pulling off his shirt and getting the 2 creams out that he'd need. One was to help accelerate healing of bruises as well as lessen pain, and the other was something he used daily to help with scar reduction. He held the cream for bruising in his hand thoughtfully. How was he going to reach the spot just below the center of his shoulder blades by himself? The answer was obvious. Without an elasticity quirk, he couldn't. Sighing dejectedly, Izuku willed himself to pick up his phone. After scrolling through his list of contacts, he let his eyes linger over his 3 closest friends at U.A. He couldn't pick Uraraka to help, because he knew they'd both just become blushing messes. Ida was out of the question too. While he would help him out happily out of duty, as the class rep as well as one of his closest friends, Izuku knew he'd have to sit through another lecture on taking care of himself. He wasn't feeling up to another one of those right now. That just left Todoroki. Shooting the dual-haired boy a text asking him if he was busy. Izuku tapped his fingers restlessly while he waited for a reply. Half of him felt like a bother for texting him. After a couple minutes passed without a response, he was tempted to text him again saying to forget it. He could go without treating the sure-to-be-blossoming bruise on his back. He'd dealt with worse injuries for years without anyone else's assistance. He grabbed his phone again, fully prepared to tell Todoroki to disregard his last text, when a knock suddenly sounded from his door. "Midoriya, it's Todoroki. You asked if I was free?" he questioned from the hallway. Izuku hastily put a shirt on as he scrambled to meet the fire and ice quirk user at the door. Why was he feeling so self-conscious all of a sudden? It wasn't like his friends hadn't seen him shirtless before. He was going to have to see him shirtless if he agreed to help him anyway. "Sorry for making you wait," the greenette greeted, opening the door and smiling a classic dimpled smile. Todoroki didn't seem bothered by the delay. "I only just got here, so there's nothing to worry about. I have nothing going on tonight anyway. Speaking of, did you need assistance with something? Your text made it sound like you needed help." As he spoke, Todoroki walked into the room, sitting down on Izuku's all-night comforter just as the owner of the room closed his door. Before his question could be answered, he noticed the 2 tubes of cream lying on the bed. He picked one up, inspecting it silently. "So it seems you were lying about that kick you took during training earlier," he accused the shorter boy. Izuku let out a nervous chuckle. "I didn't want to make Kirishima-kun worry any more than he already was. Recovery girl also already works really hard, so I didn't think some bruising was enough to see her over. I was going to try and put it on my back myself." "But you can't reach there effectively, can you?" he blushed. "No, I can't. I was wondering if you might be able to help me with that. If you're comfortable, that is." "I don't want to, Midoriya." Todoroki stopped him with a hand, a slight but present exasperated smile on his face. "It's fine. Sit down in front of me and take off your shirt," he instructed before scooting back further on the bed. There was now plenty of room for Izuku to timidly place himself in front of his friend. He pulled his shirt off, glad that his face was turned away from Todoroki's. "Thank you, Todoroki-kun." The other boy responded with a quiet, "You're welcome," a sense of accomplishment at being the one he trusted enough to help him. From there, the two sat in relative silence. Todoroki got to work putting some of the cream on his left hand, using his quirk to warm up the cold substance before applying it delicately to the angry purple, yellow, and brown bruise Kirishima's heavy kick had created. "Tell me if I'm hurting you," he warned. Izuku nodded. Starting from the darkest part, Todoroki worked in the cream by making small circles towards the edges of the bruise. He made sure his fingers weren't pressing too hard on account of causing any pain. The work was slow in practice, the half-cold, half-hot hero in training wanting to make sure he took his time and did a good job. Luckily for him, it was obvious he was doing an amazing job with the way he had Izuku completely lax before him. There was usually a buzz of nervous energy hanging around the greenette, but right then it was non-existent. The observation made him so pleased. To see his friend so relaxed made him act, so that even after he was done applying the cream, he started working the tightness out of the muscles of his spine. He made sure to avoid the injury, and the sigh of appreciation he received in return made his heart thrum. "Thank you again," Izuku stated softly. "You're really kind-hearted, Todoroki-kun. I think that's a quality the best heroes have." Todoroki rolled his eyes. Izuku would relate everything to heroes. "You're welcome, Midoriya, although your thanks aren't needed. I'm doing this because I wish to. While we're talking though, what is the other cream for?" "Oh, that's for scarring. It helps with assisting them in fading over time. It doesn't work completely, but it does have some effect. I'm mainly using it to try to get the scar on my arm to fade somewhat. I can help you put that on too if you'd like," he offered while letting his arms rest at his sides. "You have a couple on your back that you might be hard-pressed to reach yourself, you know? And I'm happy to assist while I'm sitting here anyway." "Really? Well, only if you're—" A series of knocks cut him off. The loud beats combined with a gruff voice that accompanied them, sending that usual air of nervousness blanketing over Izuku once again. "Deku," Bakugo shouted from the hallway. "Shitty hair won't leave my ass alone until I make sure his pansy-ass kick didn't actually hurt you all that bad. Idiot doesn't understand that you can take a hit." As he'd been talking, he opened the door without announcing the action, the last word trailing off when he happened upon the once tender scene before him. Todoroki glared at the blonde, annoyance flaring in the dual quirk user. "Close the door, Bakugo. Since you didn't have the common sense to ask permission before coming in, or at least announce that you were going to barge in here, you can make sure to at least do that much. Midoriya would appreciate it." For a second, it seemed like 𝗵𝘃𝗁 was going to start yelling even louder than before. But when his red-eyed gaze fell over Izuku's tense form, he thought better of it. He did not just get wailed into by his so-called friends 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲 about being less of a dick to his childhood friend, just to not at least try to accept their challenge. "I bet you couldn't be less of an asshole to Midoriya if you tried," Zero had said at some point in their shouting match discussion. "Is that a challenge, soy sauce face? Like hell I couldn't do that. I can do anything I please." Kaminari and Mina openly agreed with Zero, Kirishima being the only one to stick up for the explosive blonde. "Come on guys, I'm sure 𝗵𝘃𝗁 can be nicer to Midoriya. He'd never lose a challenge. Especially one so easy," he grinned confidently. 𝗵𝘃𝗁 had wanted to punch Kirishima so damn hard, but his hardening quirk made it much less satisfying. Closing the door, 𝗵𝘃𝗁 then walked around the bed so he could see the damage for himself. The entire time Izuku looked at him like he'd grown horns, and a tail to match his sometimes demonic personality. The blonde tried to ignore the green eyes on him since he knew he'd only want to snap the more he acknowledged them. "It's not that bad," he finally commented. His attention turned to Todoroki. "You putting some cream on it for him, or something?" "Yes, actually. I just finished applying it. I was going to help him put on some cream for scarring too, while I was at it. But you interrupted before I could begin." A scoff came from the blonde. He picked up the scar cream with one hand and made a shooing motion with the other. "I bet you suck at stuff like this, half and half. Why don't you run downstairs and get me something to drink while I take care of this? That way I can get hair for brains off my back." Both of them noticed Izuku's breath hitch at the offer, but neither commented on it. Todoroki hummed thoughtfully. "I suppose that's up to Midoriya. If he feels comfortable with me leaving for a few minutes, then it's fine with me." It's fine, Todoroki-kun. I trust Kaken." Somehow the words felt forced. A moment later 𝗵𝘃𝗁 had taken Todoroki's spot on the bed. The air was much heavier than it had been earlier. The muscles in Izuku's shoulders wound tight, even as 𝗵𝘃𝗁 barked out that he wasn't going to hurt him. "Just relax, Deku," he growled before grabbing the greenette's arm. While he hadn't done it roughly, that didn't stop Izuku from flinching, the response making 𝗵𝘃𝗁's gut churn uncomfortably. He ignored the way Izuku apologized immediately afterwards too. Things didn't get much better from there. Even as 𝗵𝘃𝗁 tried to stay quiet and be as gentle as possible while rubbing the cream onto the rectangular scar on the younger's arm, the thick tension in the room was setting them both on edge. 𝗵𝘃𝗁 didn't understand why Izuku was so scared of him when he could punch him through the building if he desired. Izuku didn't understand why 𝗵𝘃𝗁 was acting, in a cosmic sort of way, nice to him. When Izuku began muttering to himself, 𝗵𝘃𝗁 finally lost his patience. Slamming his hands down onto Izuku's shoulders, the boy underneath him jumping in fright before trying to pull away, the blonde man handled the other around until Izuku's upper half was twisted around to face him. "What the hell is your problem? I'm trying to be nice to you for once in your miserable life. And despite all that power you still act like a spineless nerd. What gives, huh? You think you're too good for me, Deku? Kaken, it's not what, huh? It's not me. Don't expect me to fall for that load of crap. If you just listen to, you're terrified of me. Just come out and say it. I know it's all my Kaken." The frustrated yell silenced 𝗵𝘃𝗁, the blonde's attention fully trained on the desperate look on Izuku's face. After a moment, the greenette finally calmed down enough to speak. "I'm sorry for shouting," he began meekly. It makes me so mad when you just scream at me when we could be talking our issues out. I'm your friend, Kaken," he said with a huff. "It's been apparent for years that you don't see me as one though. I thought when we were younger that you were just covering up the fact that you cared about me underneath all that anger. Stomping on my dreams being your way of worrying about me getting injured as a quirkless hero, hurting me over and over again being the only way you thought you could get me to give up on such a dangerous career." Izuku sighed, sadness dripping from his voice when he continued. "I was wrong though, wasn't I?" 𝗵𝘃𝗁 couldn't bring himself to respond. The greenette didn't seem surprised by the other's lack of answer, but his smile, already minuscule smile, dropped just a little more. "You know I admired you since the day I met you. I still admire you, even more than All Might," he resumed. "We were friends once, for a short time, before you got your quirk. You don't deny that. You wouldn't let our classmates get away with calling us childhood friends otherwise, and part of me believes you wouldn't put up with me to calling you Kaken if you truly hated me. Is that much at least spot on?" A subtle nod, but a response all the same. Izuku smiled. "That's a relief. After everything we've been through, even though I have every reason to be angry with you, I can't stop feeling like you're my best friend." Maybe that's why I don't mind it when you take your emotions out on me. I want to help and support you. And I know I'm the only one that can receive your true feelings. And that's okay with me. But it isn't with my friends. Your friends are a lot smarter than you are, nerd. Definitely. I can't help how I feel though, Kaken. At this point, your chance at changing my feelings is non-existent too, he laughed. Anyway, I don't want things to always be so strained between us. I miss you. And I don't want you to be upset with me, okay? I really don't. But I'm not really sure why you're trying to be nice to me all of a sudden. Although I bet it has something to do with Kirishima after what happened a couple days ago in the lounge. That wasn't your fault though. Like hell it wasn't. Bakugo ground out, eyes narrowed. Don't lie to me, Deku. You don't think I've seen the outcome of my shitty attitude? You flinch all the time, stutter, have no sense of self-worth or self-preservation, hate loud noises, freak out from the littlest touch, assume people are going to hurt you, and have a pain tolerance higher than some pro heroes. That's all my fault. There was a moment of silence. You're actually taking responsibility? Izuku's voice shook in disbelief. Bakugo turned his head away pointedly. Of course I am. That's what heroes do, right? I can't keep blaming my shit on other people anymore if I want to be number one. Thank you, Kaken. Huh. Also, I forgive you. Huh? Izuku smiled, eyes closing for a couple seconds before opening again. That was your version of an apology, wasn't it? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. The greenette laughed it off, the grip on his shoulders loosening so that he could turn himself around voluntarily. Right. Anyway, I'm trying to get a handle on some of those things you mentioned. I think the touch thing is definitely getting better, isn't it? If you're letting half and half feel you up, then it must be. What? He wasn't, you know what I mean. When I'm nearby you, you're wound tighter than a spring. Everyone else is different though, aren't they? I've seen the girls, Ida, Todoroki, and my idiot friends touching you casually the last couple of days, and you've started to become more accustomed to it. He turned away momentarily. It's helping the whole touch starved stuff Auntie and Co. was talking about way back when, right? Yeah, was the soft reply. They really are helping. What about me? Bakugo felt Izuku's eyes widened without having to look up. Is what I tried doing earlier. Did that help? Izuku seemed guilty. It's different when it's you. I'm not saying this to upset you, by the way. It's just the truth. When I felt Todoroki's hands on my back, he paused, contemplating. It felt warm. Not because of his quirk, but being around him makes me feel safe. Protected. His touches are kind, and I can say without a shadow of doubt, he would never hurt me outside of training. With you though, Kaken, no matter how much I want to stop myself from feeling like this, your touch stings. It's like there's phantom heat behind every point of contact that makes me feel like I'm going to get burned again. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't do that outside of training anymore, but that's something I need to get used to. Yeah, I get it. Bakugo huffed. I'm sorry. I'm really trying to. Bakugo cut him off with a raised hand. Save it, nerd. You don't need to apologize or explain it to me. I had 4 idiots pounding it into my brain earlier that fixing this mess is going to be slow going. You'd trust me with your life on the battlefield because I'm someone you look up to. But when it comes to me being someone you trust, being your friend, then I have a long way to go. Kaken. And I can't promise I won't screw everything up again too. We have more to talk about than can be discussed now, because I'm pretty sure there's a nosy bastard standing outside the door with drinks. Todoroki promptly walked in holding a tray with 3 glasses of hot tea on it. I apologize for eavesdropping, but I didn't want to interrupt if you two were having a moment. Bakugo immediately took that as an insult. A moment? I believe those call for intimacy. Izuku blushed. Todoroki-kun, that isn't, whatever. Bakugo suddenly cut them both off in favor of getting off the bed. As he walked past Todoroki, he grabbed one of the glasses, opening the door and sending a scathing look over his shoulder. I'll let it slide this time, but only because I'm feeling generous. See you nerds in class tomorrow. With that he walked out, closing the door behind him without even slamming it. Todoroki brought a glass of tea to Izuku while taking a small sip of his own. I take it everything went relatively well then. Yeah, Izuku answered as he stared into his tea like it held the secrets of the universe. I think it did, Midoriya, watch out. The green-haired teen spun around at the sound of Ida's voice, his eyes filled with confusion as to why he needed to watch out behind him during one-on-one combat when his partner was right in front of him. Neither Class 1A nor Class 1B were supposed to be using their quirks during the combined hand-to-hand training too. So why was there a ball of pink light heading directly towards his chest then? Before he could react, whatever quirk it was hit him. He closed his eyes tightly upon instinct. To his surprise, however, he didn't feel a thing even after the little ball dispersed upon contact. Still, he stared at where the ball of light had hit him as he heard the class rep begin reprimanding someone from Class 1B. Something had to happen, right? Surely, even if the quirk itself was harmless, it wasn't just for show. His attention was occupied by trying to figure out if he felt different at all until the person he'd been sparring with, who was none other than Bakugo, made a noise of impatience. "Deku, pay attention so I can beat your ass again fair and square." Rolling his eyes, Izuku finally turned his attention back to his childhood best friend. The moment their eyes met though, his breath caught in his throat. It was like he was seeing the blonde for the first time. How hadn't he noticed it before? Bakugo was hot. "Midoriya," Ida shouted from across the lot, urgency clear in his voice. "Close your eyes. If you look into anyone else's eyes, the quirk you were hit with will take effect." Oops, Izuku thought sluggishly, eyes roaming across Bakugo's muscled arms. Too late for that. Oh man, he could throw me to the ground, and I wouldn't even complain. As Ida approached the boy, Bakugo sent a glare at the guy interrupting their fight. What did that quirk even do? 4 eyes. It looked pretty weak to me. Broke apart the moment it hit the useless loser. It's called Cupid's arrow. He will become infatuated with the first person he locks eyes with for a period of time, unfortunately. Please don't tell me he already looked at you. Bakugo froze for a second as he replayed what Ida had just told him. Wait, are you telling me he's going to fall in love or some shit with the first person that manages to meet his eyes? He's already looked at me. Shit. I'm going to explode whoever did this, I swear Kaken, Izuku cut off with a melodious laugh. You're so adorable when you make threats like that. What? Actually, you're adorable all of the time. He amended while staring lovingly at the blonde. Bakugo's angry face slowly morphed into one of horror. Do we have to spar? As much as I'd like to have you knock me to the ground, fighting with you might mean you getting hurt. I don't want that. Ida seemed at a loss for words as he gaped at his friend. When he recovered a few moments later, he cleared his throat awkwardly. This is not good. Not good at all. I'm going to get Aizawa-sensei. In an instant, he activated his quirk, shouting for their homeroom teacher like his life depended on it. He's so over the top, Izuku commented. Sort of like you, Kaken, but you do it in a different way. You're way more attractive, explosive. Attractive and explosive, really. Your quirk is explosion after all. And you're hot. Can you get any more amazing? Bakugo's face lit up pink at the compliments being thrown at him. The other's emerald eyes staring at him like he was the most important person in his life. It made him feel things. Usually he felt various forms of anger, but Izuku was making him feel something different. It tingled in his gut and made him feel embarrassed yet exhilarated at the same time. It pissed him off. Shut up, Deku, he growled. Before he knew what he was doing, he closed the distance between them, fist gripping the shorter boy by his gym uniform and lifting him up slightly. Knock this lovey-dovey crap off now before I knock you unconscious. Izuku wasn't fazed in the slightest. While he usually would be struggling out of the other's grip and trying to defuse the situation with an apology, in his current state he just grinned dopily. I like when you're this close to me, although I wish you were grabbing my hand and not my shirt. You can do whatever you want though. I trust you, Kaken. He finished with a smile brighter than the sun. For a moment it almost blinded the boy holding him. Bakugo let go of him immediately, setting off an explosion in frustration before taking in a large breath. A moment later he was screaming at the top of his lungs. Whoever has the shitty love quirk better fix this moron right now. Hours later, Izuku Midoriya was sitting at his desk like normal. With his chin resting on his palm, eyes half closed in the utmost happiness, he stared at the back of Bakugo's head like the boy was a king or a god. He had been doing it for so long that the rest of his classmates were really freaked out despite knowing about his condition. Aizawa was more annoyed than perturbed, but there was nothing he could do about the effects of another quirk on the student. He could only erase the individual's quirk, not an effect due to it. That didn't mean he would excuse Izuku from taking notes though. Midoriya, the tired-eyed hero chastised. Stop mooning over Bakugo and take notes. If you don't, I will put you out in the hallway. But he's so amazing it's hard to look away. The honesty in his voice disturbed the teacher, but he held firm. If I send you out into the hallway, you won't be able to look at him at all. Now start taking notes. I won't repeat myself again. At the notion of his spectacular view being taken away, Izuku nodded vigorously before picking up his pencil and flipping to an open page of his notebook. The teacher turned around in mild satisfaction. That was good enough, he supposed. By the end of class, however, he realized he hadn't specified what the notes were supposed to be on. This occurred to him when 𝗧𝗵𝗲 glanced over at his desk neighbor and his jaw dropped. Wow, Midoriya. I never knew you had artistic side like that. In an instant, several other students crowded around the green-haired boy's desk, even 𝗵𝗃𝗲 spinning around to see what all of the commotion was about. Gasps of awe and praise were heard by the teacher in the front, which wasn't enough to entice him into checking out whatever was going on. Yet 𝗵𝗃𝗲's silence did spark his curiosity. What is going on? He asked flatly, arms crossed. The students ran back to their seats in record time. Izuku was left smiling at his notebook like it contained the secrets of the universe. They just wanted to see my notes, Izuku answered. I illustrated my past knowledge of Kaken's appearance, and everyone seemed to like it. Aizawa didn't have the patience for this. A moment later he was demanding Izuku give him the notebook, to which the boy happily obliged. When the teacher finally gathered his resolve and looked at the illustration, he was actually rather impressed. Izuku did have the potential to be an artist. Even though it was a sketch done in pencil, the amount of detail and light contrast was astounding. The scene was from their second trip to the 𝗧𝗏. It gave a startling visual through Izuku's eyes as he was being pulled up the canyon during rescue training. His viewpoint, which the picture depicted, showed his perspective as he was nearing the top of the fissure. This meant 𝗵𝗃𝗲 was staring down at him as he single-handedly raised him up by the grappling cable. While his face was set in his usual scowl, Izuku had outlined his form with what appeared to be a mixture of sparkles and stars, while using varying shades of graphite to make it appear as if light from the sun was shining from him instead. There was even a faint outline of a halo above the blonde boy's head. All in all, Aizawa was thoroughly baffled by Izuku's perspective. Sure, he was being affected by an infatuation quirk, but this level of detail probably meant he had thought about this memory fairly often, or at least that it was important to him to have such a strong memory of it. I think I was too afraid of Kaken attacking me at the time, but I wanted to tell him how amazing of a hero he looked like at that moment. Izuku found himself sighing. He's literally an angel. From the other side of the room, Kaminari gaped. Lord Explosion Murder, an angel, you're crazy. Plenty of others grumbled in agreement, which only proved to set 𝗵𝗃𝗲 off. Before he could do more than let out a roar, however, Izuku cut him off to respond to Kaminari. Izuku smiled brightly. It's called being crazy in love, actually. Deku. Yes, Kaken? Do me a favor, and never say you're in love with me again. Actually, do me another favor and jump out the window, so I don't have to hear this shit. To everyone's horror, the lovesick teen nodded sagely. It was as if he took the offhanded command seriously. Okay, Kaken, if that's what makes you happy. He got up from his desk and turned towards the window without a word. As he made to unlock the window, everyone began screaming in panic. Aizawa quickly reading the situation and capturing Izuku with his bandages before the window could even be opened. 𝗵𝗃𝗲, take back your statement at once, the teacher instructed. The explosive blonde realized with some dismay what awful connotations this originally harmless quirk truly had. To make someone fall in love with them to the point of going to whatever lengths to make the object of said affection happy held some serious power if used by a villain. He was glad a hero course student was the one wielding it. But it didn't stop his veins from filling with ice upon seeing Izuku ready to jump out a window while on the 4th floor. Deku, I was only joking. Come sit back down. The other boy's voice was somehow even brighter as Aizawa released him. With a spin that nearly startled half of the class, Izuku looked at 𝗵𝗃𝗲 with newfound affection. Does that mean I can go back to drawing you some more? It's not like I can stop you, the other grumbled. Taking that as a yes, Izuku more or less skipped back into his seat and eagerly went back to drawing in another notebook. No one dared to acknowledge the elephant in the room until Aizawa dismissed his class a few minutes later. When they did dare, however, they didn't just acknowledge it. They impaled the imaginary elephant, poor thing. Hey, 𝗵𝗃𝗲, you don't think Midoriya actually likes you, right? That drawing seemed really detailed for him to just sketch it out on the fly. Do you think he actually sees you that way? Kirishima asked hesitantly. He seemed afraid of what his friend's reaction would be, and activated his hardening quirk as a precaution. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 huffed, arms crossed and ever-present scowl on his face. He doesn't like me, shit for brains. He has always followed me around like some sort of stalkerish puppy though. Even before I got my quirk, he was always praising me, rightfully so since I was always this amazing, and he's never stopped. Still didn't stop him from looking down on me and thinking I was weak. For how strong he called me, He would pity me like I was helpless or some shit. He still acts like that sometimes. Really pisses me off. The red hair teen cringed. Bro, I don't think that's him looking down on you. He's the sort of type to help people, you know? He wants to be a hero after all. I'm sure he never meant to make you think he was above you. He's right, Izuku broke in happily. You've always been amazing to me, Keiken. I've looked up to you since we were little. You're my image of victory, even more so than All Might himself. You'll be the best hero ever one day. I'm sure of it. The magnitude of brightness of the boy's smile nearly blinded his classmates, the grumpy blonde being talked to even taken back a bit at how genuine he sounded. Was this a side effect of the quirk, or did he really mean that? Whatever. Just go back to drawing, Deku. I already finished my next drawing though. Wanna see? He was met with a resounding yes from those watching the interactions like a soap opera. The drawing he held up was a memory from the attack on the 𝗧𝗏 during their first visit. The landscape and warp villain were drawn using darker shades, the villain seeming to be charging towards the viewer. However, a much lighter drawn image of Bakugo was sketched colliding with the villain and saving the viewer from an attack. A wild grin was on the explosive blonde's face, yet the sketch still made an almost angelic aura appear around the hero in training. It's from when you saved me from Kurogiri. I never said thank you because I know you hate that, but I was grateful for your help that day. You're such a great guy, Keiken. The tingling in the other's stomach appeared again, and the chatters of his classmates grated on his brain like chips of glass. They kept muttering about how strange it was for such a kind guy like Izuku to moon over someone like Bakugo, even outside the effect of the quirk, as they'd all heard Izuku fanboy over him countless times. It made Bakugo sick. Suddenly he couldn't take it anymore. Shut up. Bakugo shoved the notebook into Izuku's chest, red eyes flashing with annoyance as struggled to keep himself from shaking with rage. I am not a great guy, stupid Deku. I wasn't trying to rescue you that day. I just wanted to beat that villain's ass. You're just a stepping stone on my path to being the next #1 hero. I don't care about you at all, alright? Get that through your head. So stop spouting all that annoying lovey-dovey crap before I blow you from here too. At the sight of Izuku's lip wobbling and tears beginning to stream down his face, Bakugo bit his tongue. The absolutely oppressive protective glares being sent his way helped silence him as well. What is this feeling? Bakugo thought as he felt a bit like he was being strangled. This can't be guilt, right? I don't feel sorry for screaming at the nerd. I've never felt regret for something in my life. Well, maybe the incident in middle school about the roof. But regret was foreign to him, sure. But that was definitely what he was feeling. I'm sorry for annoying you, the greenette sniffled. I'll just head home now. Have a nice rest of your day, everyone. He managed a small smile and wave, yet the tears on his cheeks and fakeness in his voice made it obvious he was struggling to seem genuine. See you all tomorrow. With that, Izuku hastily made his way out of the classroom, a concerning Iida and Uraraka hurrying to catch up with him to make sure he wouldn't be alone going home. Once the trio was gone, however, Todoroki sent a withering look at the center of attention. You know he didn't deserve that. I would suggest you apologize, but it seems he'll be home soon and the quirk will be wearing off any time now. That means you'll have to say something to him tomorrow since he will remember what happened. And even if he pretends your words didn't affect him, we all know it for what it is pretending. Bakugo didn't want to admit it, but Todoroki had a point. He'd messed up. That next morning when Izuku left his apartment, he was startled to see Bakugo leaning up against the railing nearby. Hi, Keiken, the greenette waved timidly. About yesterday, he trailed off when Bakugo raised a hand. Before you say another word, Deku, let me set you straight. I know you remember everything that happened yesterday. That means I don't need you lying to me. You're shit at it anyways. I have just one question for you. Why, yeah, ruby eyes burned into emerald. What am I to you? What are you, to me? Izuku repeated back slowly. This only caused the blonde to roll his eyes before signaling them to start walking towards the station. He knew it would take a while for the shorter boy to get his head into order. After a couple minutes of silence, the greenette finally opened his mouth again. Kaken. Yeah? That was my answer. Bakugo glared at Izuku, annoyed. What the hell sort of answer is that? That doesn't tell me shit. Izuku shrugged. I don't know, I feel like it sort of tells you everything, doesn't it? You're my friend whether or not you acknowledge me as your own. You're also someone I admire greatly, someone I look up for inspiration, someone I want to be like. I see. So yesterday's sappiness was because of the quirk, right? Well, not entirely. He admitted with a blush. I mean, most of it was. The admiration might have been a tad bit exaggerated. I'm not in love with you, Though if that's what you're worried about. I'm also not that attracted to you, physically. I mean, you aren't bad looking, but I don't, can it, nerd? You've told me all I needed to know. Let's just pretend it never happened, okay? Got it. Also, the blonde added as they neared the station, about what I shouted yesterday. I said I don't care about you, but I meant to say I hate you. Izuku frowned. Is that supposed to make me feel better, or? The opposite of love is apathy, idiot. Hating you means I do care. And here I thought you weren't a complete dumbass. The brunette tilted his head in confusion. So is that your Kaken way of apologizing, or? Bakugo shoulder-checked him as they boarded the train. His silence was enough of a confirmation for them both, and Izuku couldn't hold back a small smile. You are all dismissed with the exception of Midoriya. Izuku felt a rush of confusion and worry envelope him at the comment, Uraraka and Ida glancing at him with similar emotions as they made their way out. He remained seated as everyone gathered their things and left the room. Once everyone else had left, Aizawa walked over to the door to close it. It was at the same time he gestured for Izuku to stand up, his tired eyes blinking slowly. Over here, problem child. We have something important to discuss. Why, yes, Aizawa-sensei. The homeroom teacher rolled his eyes at the nervousness, making his student's voice stutter. Relax. What we're discussing isn't even about you, rather than it is Eri. Eri-chan, did something happen? Nothing bad, he responded while slipping into his sleeping bag. Mirio and I were discussing the prospect of having trusted you. Faculty and students tutor her. While she is a bright young girl, she quite frankly has no education. And even though Mirio and I have begun to teach her how to read and write, we do not have enough time to provide her the teaching she needs. She cannot be put into a public elementary school for the same reason she must reside here on campus. The principal and I, however, talked about possibly working in time slots for you, Uraraka, Tsuyu, Kirishima, and a few others she is familiar with to teach her specific subjects. I figured I would ask you first since that girl adores you just as much as Mirio. Izuku smiled at the information. He was beyond thrilled Eri would be receiving the education she deserved, and his heart fluttered knowing she really liked him. I would be happy to teach her, Aizawa-sensei. I believe my classmates would as well. The teacher nodded in approval, although it was hard to take him super seriously since only his face was visible in his yellow cocoon. Great. I'll be speaking with them later then. One more question before you go, Midoriya. Yes, sensei. I have been thinking about taking Eri somewhere outside you. He started a bit hesitantly, as if this wasn't his area of expertise. After asking All Might for recommendations on where to bring a young girl such as herself to have fun, and maybe see some beauty the world has to offer, he brought up the prospect of making the trip into a class field trip. In order to make her feel more at ease as well as provide more protection, of course. I'm currently entertaining the idea. What does this have to do with me? Izuku couldn't help but ask. Aizawa sighed. All Might was being vague when I asked him where he thinks we should go. He mentioned you knew the perfect place, which brings me to the question. Where would you take a girl locked away for so long to experience the beauty of the outside world that is also generally devoid of people or prospective dangers? Midoriya. Izuku didn't have to rack his brain too hard for an answer. Have you heard of Dagobah Beach? To say most of Class 1 was excited would have been an understatement. This is so freaking awesome. Mina gushed as the students filed off of the bus. I can't believe Aizawa-sensei has such a soft spot for my little horn buddy that he decided to take us here. It is a bit surprising, but after the events of this past year, it would do us well to spend some time relaxing, distressing, and having fun. Ida commented. Beside him, Uraraka was clutching an already inflated inner tube with a grin. Ida-kun, do your engines work underwater? If so, you should totally push me around. That doesn't seem like it'd be very safe. At the same time as their discussion, Kirishima was attempting to change Bakugo's mind about not sitting under his umbrella the entire afternoon and evening. Come on, bro. We're going to have loads of fun. Siro brought a giant beach ball to throw around, and Hagakure brought a frisbee and a volleyball. There's sandcastle building, and splashing around in the water too. Heck, we could even race each other in the water. Don't care, hair for brains. I should be training right now, the blonde grumbled. Why the hell did that sleep-deprived jerk make this trip mandatory anyway? Because part of being a hero is about taking care of yourself. This means taking a break every once in a while, enjoying life, and letting the body rest while the mind relaxes. Aizawa explained from where he stood directly behind the explosive teenager. Now, if you're done complaining, tell anyone if they need me, I'll be sunbathing. Go to Ida first if there are any minor problems though. With that, the teacher found a spot in the middle of the beach to set up his own umbrella. In a matter of seconds, he was sprawled across a towel with a cat on it, a sleeping mask covering his eyes as he took a nap in the shade. "What the hell?" Bakugo raged. "That's not sunbathing." "Dude, chill," Jiraiya hissed as she walked by. For a moment, she thought she would be blown away before the blonde noticed who she was pointing at. A couple feet away, Eri was tentatively getting off the bus, a white sundress on over her bathing suit. Behind her, Izuku had a couple towels slung over his shoulder, as well as a duffel bag put together by Aizawa. The two made their way onto the sand. But the moment Eri's feet left solid ground, she stopped walking. She looked down at the sand in amazement. "It's falling apart." Izuku laughed good-naturedly at the reaction. "It's a beach, Eri-chan. That means the ground is made up of tiny little grains of sand. Why don't you take your sandals off? It will feel nice and warm on your bare feet, see?" he said while slipping of his own bright red sandals. He made a show of stepping on the sand. "Also, it won't fall apart unless you go near the waterline. The sand only gets mushy if it's covered in water." "Oh." Eri tentatively followed Izuku's lead, taking her sandals in hand before walking across the sand. "It's so warm," she smiled after a couple seconds, curling her toes in the sand and enjoying the feeling. "I like the beach. I'm glad." A few minutes later, most of the class had chosen what activity they wanted to take part in first. There was so much stuff to do in the roughly 5 hours they had to enjoy themselves, and they wanted to take advantage of the time they had with their friends. Since it would cool down as the sun crossed the sky, many students chose to start their field trip with swimming. "Ready to go in?" Izuku asked Eri where they sat on a giant all-night towel. For the first several minutes since arriving at the beach, Eri had been too enraptured with the sand and the view to want to do anything else other than run her hands through the sand and stare. Her eyes shined with amazement as she looked out at where the waves lapped at the shore, at the line where the sky met the water, at the sand, and all of those enjoying themselves. It was only after speaking to her directly that she snapped out of her stupor in favor of gazing up at Izuku. She started. "I'm not sure. It looks fun. But won't it be cold?" The angry boy threw the boy with a lightning bolt hair into the water, and he was screaming that the water was freezing. Izuku sighed. Classic Kaken. After explaining to Eri how some of his classmates could over-exaggerate, he walked her over to the water's edge so she could test it. In her light blue, one-piece bathing suit, she looked absolutely adorable as she lifted one foot to hesitantly dip her toe in. "You were right, Deku-san," she stated with a smile before stepping into the water. When she was up to her knees, she turned around, eyes full of glee. "The water feels so nice." The brunette chuckled. "Isn't it?" he asked rhetorically before stepping in himself. They walked in a bit further, hand in hand, until the water met her elbows. "Want to learn how to swim?" "Swim?" She seemed confused. "You mean being able to go on top of the water? Why can't I just use what she has?" Eri pointed over to where Jiraiya was lounging on a large record-shaped and designed flotation device. "I bet we could ask someone to borrow theirs, but wouldn't it be cool to know how to swim like them?" He pointed to where Ieyasu and Todoroki were swimming alongside each other. "It's not too hard, I promise. The most challenging part will be having the courage to let go of me once you have the basics down." Her gaze turned fearful, and she gripped his hand tighter. "I'll let go of you." "No." It took a solid 3 minutes to calm the girl down. Izuku had to vow not to let go of her as well entice her with a promise of chocolate chip cookies, both of which were better alternatives to her tears. In the end, he decided to grab the floaties Aizawa had the foresight of bringing. Once she had those on her, she was much more content with going into the deeper part of the water where Izuku could actually swim in. "Hey, Eri-chan, why don't you grab onto this?" he asked her while holding onto a pool noodle. As soon as she did as he asked, he began to slowly pull her along the water. When she erupted in giggles, he proceeded to move her in small circles. It was a couple minutes later that Uraraka and Tsuyu approached them. "Deku-kun," Uraraka started energetically after greeting Eri. "I had an awesome idea for something fun we could do." "What's that?" The brunette turned to Eri and whispered something in the girl's ear. This followed with Eri having to whisper into Uraraka's ear. They went back and forth a couple of times until finally Eri nodded, and Uraraka lightly tapped on the little girl's shoulder. "There we go. You're almost weightless now. Deku-kun, could you please float on your back for a bit?" Izuku was unsure of why he was doing it, but he decided to trust his friend. Once he was on his back, floating above the water, his questions were answered. Uraraka picking up Eri and depositing her on top of his stomach like he was a surfboard. "She's not going to float off, right?" The one for all user couldn't help but confirm. 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 pouted. Of course not. I made her body weightless, but the water in her hair along with the floaties and bathing suit will be more than enough to make sure she doesn't float off. I'll be swimming with Tsuyu only a few yards away to keep an eye on her anyway, so don't worry about it. That put Izuku at ease. Glancing up at Eri, he grinned. Ready for a relaxing ride? Yeah. The next 15 minutes consisted of Izuku swimming backwards over the water. He passed a few of his classmates as he went, Eri greeting them shyly before they moved on. After a while, though, Eri asked if she could try standing up. I see how it is. You just want to use me as a surfboard, huh? He joked. She didn't quite get what he was saying. Either way, a moment later, she was balancing on his abdominals. Since she was practically weightless, it merely felt like a slight pressure over his stomach, which he didn't mind. Can I jump in? She asked all of a sudden. It took all of 2 seconds for her to realize it was because she noticed Kirishima and Mente cannonballing off of a nearby rocky outcrop. Sure, wait just a second though, okay? I'll tell you when to jump. Also plug your nose or else you might get water in them, which might not feel very nice. Okay. Seconds later, Izuku shouted for 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 to release her quirk just as Eri prepared to jump. The gravity quirk user happily obliged, and a moment later Eri went splashing into the water with one hand plugging her nose. She bounced right back out thanks to her floaties, blinking away water before grinning. That was so much fun. Can I do it again? After a while, they relocated to the shore where Hagakure, Yaoyorozu, Aoyama, and Koda were making sandcastles. When the girls offered to show her how to make one, she merrily accepted the invitation, telling Izuku she would be fine since Aizawa was only a couple yards away. As long as you're sure. Have fun, Eri-chan. He called out before heading towards where Todoroki, 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏, Ida, Shoji, and Tokoyami were playing Kirishima, Shiro, Mina, Kaminari, and Bakugo in beach volleyball. They were using a makeshift court with the poles being pillars of ice, and a net made courtesy of a creation quirk. Midoriya, Todoroki greeted just as Ida failed to hit the ball over the net. Would you like to join us? Please do. Tokoyami added. We've been tied for the past 10 minutes, and it is grating on my nerves. Izuku counted the number of players on either team and frowned. But it's 5 versus 5 already. If I join, then their team would need someone else to join theirs too. They scanned the beach for a prospective player. The 4 making sandcastles were out. Mente was buried up to his neck in sand after plotting to untie Yaoyorozu's bikini, and Sato was chatting with Ajiro while Jiro sunbathed on a towel nearby. This left Tsuyu, who was still enjoying the water, as the most likely addition. 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 grinned before calling a timeout and running towards the shoreline. I'll be right back. What's going on? Shiro asked from where he was about to serve the ball. Oh, I think she's going to see if Tsu wants to play so Midoriya can join, Kirishima observed. Bakugo, you good with Tsu joining our team? Anyone's better than Deku, the blonde answered as he grinned menacingly at his childhood friend from the other side of the net. You'd better watch out, nerd. I'm going to beat their asses even harder now that you're playing. Izuku gulped. Would there ever be a day Bakugo didn't see everything as a challenge? The game had gone on for a total of 50 minutes when everyone besides Izuku and Bakugo retired. Either team would score one after another, so the self-decided rule of having to have at least 3 points on the opposite team to win had yet to occur. However, neither Bakugo nor Izuku wanted to give up. They were strangely competitive about this. I'm going to crush you one-on-one. Try me, Kakin. Bring it, Deku. With that, Bakugo sent the ball flying with an explosion just for Izuku to jump into the air, using one for all and hitting back down over the next. The angry blonde had to use his own quirk to make a dive for the ball, hitting it into the air where he could slam it back over the net again. 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 laughed lightly while Ida sighed in frustration at the scene. At least they're having a good time, she offered. Eri-chan is too. Look. Ida turned to see those previously making sandcastles tossing around a beach ball to each other. Off to the side, he noticed there was a pile of seashells too, which implied they'd help the girls scour the beach for them. The class representative smiled softly. That is a nice thing to see. Yeah, 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 agreed with a wobbly smile of her own. She deserves this and so much more. Ida was about to say something else when a large explosion made him lose his train of thought. A moment later, the class representative was pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. All around him, bits and pieces of burnt volleyball rained across the sand. It took a full 10 seconds for 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏 to get the words she was trying to say out between the bouts of her laughter. Looks like they tied, huh, Ida-kun? No. It looks like Bakugo's going to use 𝗵𝗃𝗲 as a ball to finish their match, and Midoriya is actually considering it. He broke into a quirk-powered run as he shouted at his classmates. Bakugo, Midoriya. In the name of our prestigious alma mater. Uriaraka could only hold her stomach as she laughed. She would see how Ida was after having 𝗵𝗃𝗲 thrown at him and falling into the sand in just a moment. The sun was low in the sky by the time Aizawa gave them their 1-hour warning. We leave after sunset, he informed everyone from where he was supervising Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, Sato, and Mina in arranging a makeshift bonfire pit. A few feet away, Ojiro and Hagakure were opening up the packages of chocolate, marshmallows, and graham crackers for 𝗬𝗲𝗏s, while Shoji grabbed small wooden disposable skewers to put marshmallows on. Eri stared at the food items in anticipation from where she sat next to Izuku. They sat on their towel, a couple feet away from the now-lit campfire, among where the rest of Class 1 was slowly gathering. Are you excited for 𝗬𝗲𝗏s, Eri-chan? Izuku asked. Shoji was beginning to distribute the sticks now. The girl nodded. They're sweet like caramel apples, right? Yep. You're going to love it, I'm sure. There should be extra marshmallows too if you want to roast more afterwards. Shoji handed the two their skewers then, both of them thanking him as he went on to the next person. Izuku motioned for Eri to move closer to the fire. Always make sure you have 3 points of contact when crouching down by a fire, he instructed by example. He made sure he had one leg, a foot, and one hand flat on the sand. It's so nothing can upset your balance and send you tumbling into the fire. After that, you just have to hold the marshmallow above the glowing wood. That's where the most heat is. Why can't I put the marshmallow above the flames, or in the flames? Wouldn't that cook it faster? Izuku watched as Bakugo lit his own marshmallow on fire with a small explosion, cooking it a dark golden brown. Kirishima whooped in awe before begging his friend to do his too. The brunette smiled fondly. You can put it by the flames, but it's not as hot, and that risks it catching on fire. If that happens, it'll burn or just fall off of the stick. Oh. With that, Eri copied Izuku in holding the end of the stick, just above the glowing wood at the bottom of the campfire. She turned it slowly just like Izuku in order to get the entire marshmallow a light golden brown. When they were done, they walked over to the table where they picked their marshmallows off of the stick before putting them onto the graham crackers, putting chocolate and another graham cracker on top of it. It's all melty, she exclaimed, trying not to let the now melting chocolate fall. I'm going to make a mess, that's fine. Most people make a mess and look silly when eating these. Even you, Deku-san. Especially me, he grinned back. With that, they dug in, Eri's eyes lighting up at the 𝗬𝗲𝗏. It wasn't long after she was asking for another one, and Izuku didn't have the heart not to allow it. When the 𝗬𝗲𝗏 supplies ran out and cleanup was done with half an hour left before sunset to spare, the class decided to walk along the beach while they watched the sunset. Aizawa walked languidly in the rear so he could watch over his students as they enjoyed the dying light together. Did you have fun today? Izuku asked the little girl on his shoulders. Beside him, Uriaraka and Tsuyu chatted, while Ida watched over a few of their classmates who were beginning to chase each other playfully across the sand. Eri hummed in answer, a small yawn escaping her. Yeah, she stated quietly before trailing off half asleep. I had a lot of fun. I'll have to tell Aizawa ni I thank you later. Izuku fought back a bark of laughter. Aizawa ni, huh? That's adorable. Izuku Midoriya. All for one stated with a voice amplified by yet another quirk. It reached far enough for the media equipment in the now retreating helicopter to pick up. He's the one you passed it on to, isn't he? That formerly quirkless child is your successor. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Ida froze. The trio slowly turned to look at the green-haired boy standing slack-jawed in utter confusion, although there seemed to be realization dawning in the blonde's eyes. That's right, All Might. Your big secret will finally been exposed for the entire world to see. Everyone will know the truth about your quirk. It's a fusion called One for All, the villain spoke to the public. That brings the user incredible stockpiled strength. However, it is not transferred through genetics like most quirks. No, One for All is transferred by DNA exchange only when the previous holder wishes it to be so. The reason the symbol of peace will die here today is because he's already chosen a legacy. His strength wanes, and all you will have left to succeed him is a boy, not even finished with his first year of high school. I truly pity you for the sad future that awaits. Izuku's blood ran cold. And no, he whispered, his entire form trembling. It can't be. All Might's secrets. Why? This is bad. This is really, really bad. This is, why was it suddenly getting so hard for him to breathe? His vision was beginning to blur, his body suddenly feeling heavy. The secret that had been protected for generations was suddenly out. Even if when All Might defeated 𝗓𝗏, there was going to be a tremendous uproar among people across the earth. Their entire view and understanding of quirks was about to change. Their vision of All Might would be fractured, and Izuku would be targeted by villains everywhere. People, civilians and heroes alike, would make their case on why they should be the inheritor. They would tell him why he wasn't a truly worthy inheritor, why he didn't deserve such power. The press would eat him alive. What would his mother think? His friends? They'd been lied to for so long. Maybe he wasn't good enough to become the next beacon of hope after all. Deku. The familiar shout of his childhood friends snapped him out of his daze. Feeling Bakugo's arm gripping his own tightly, grounding him somewhat, Izuku turned to face him with tears in his eyes. "Kaken," he said with a watery voice. "I'm as sorry for—" "Shut up, nerd. If what that villain was spouting is true, then you had no choice but to keep All Might's and your own secrets. Your sappy friends will understand if they really care about you. But my mom, I told her what I told everyone else. I lied to her." Bakugo's eyes widened at this. "You mean to tell me I knew more than Auntie and Co? I don't know, okay? It just felt like you had to know. Like you deserved to know more than anyone else," he attempted to explain. He opened his mouth to say more, but a huge explosion cut them off. On the television screen a few moments later, 𝗓𝗏 lay unconscious in a smoking crater. People roared in approval at All Might's victory. Even those who seemed confused beyond belief joined in. The heroic triumph over evil overshadowing any misgivings those currently had about the truth about their #1 hero and his quirk. This only made the contrast between how loud it was and how quiet it was about to be when All Might approached a camera crew that was making its way onto the scene along with disaster relief. "Citizens," he addressed the crowd, unwavering despite his emancipated form. Izuku's breath caught in his throat at the bloody tattered uniform his idol had hanging off of himself. "Today a great evil has been defeated." There was another round of applause from many of those watching the broadcast. "However, today an even greater thing than my body has been broken. Your trust in me." Silence. "I owe everyone watching an explanation. The villain stated earlier that I have been weakening for some time. And unfortunately, he was not mistaken. 7 years ago, I fought the exact same villain when both of us were stronger. And while I thought I defeated him back, then it came at a cost. I received an injury that would slowly lead to the end of my career. Thankfully," he continued, "my quirk is special. One for All is a rare combination of two quirks. One allows the user to store and release massive amounts of power, while the other passes on said quirk through DNA transfer. For a lack of better terms, One for All is not transferred genetically from generation to generation. It cannot be taken forcefully, but can be given to anyone the holder chooses. That is why I tried my best to keep it under wraps with only a close few knowing the truth. For keeping this secret, I humbly apologize." He bowed his head for a moment before raising it back up once more. There was still much he had to say. "That being said, the villain also revealed that I had chosen a successor of my quirk. That is also true. One for All has already been steadily leaving me, but it exists in another." Izuku felt his friend's eyes on him once more. "I will not say the boy's name again, but I will tell you a bit about him." A smile stretched across All Might's face. "I met him barely a year ago when I rescued him from a villain. At first glance I saw him as nothing more than a citizen in need. Later he came across as a scrawny fanboy," he laughed. "But I would learn that he had a heart fit for helping people. This once quirkless boy reminded me what it truly means to be a hero." Ida gasped from where he stood behind Izuku. "Bakugo wasn't joking back then," the blue-haired boy whispered in awe. You were quirkless." The greenette forced himself to ignore his friend in favor of paying attention to the television. "I'm aware no matter how I explain myself, there will be countless criticisms of my choice. To that I say this. I will defend my decision in choosing this boy as my successor until my dying breath. And to those thinking you can take advantage of his youth, well," he grinned, "you'll just have to get through me first. It's his turn now, citizens, and I could not be more proud. My boy," a finger pointed directly towards the camera, "you are next." Ever so slowly a variety of sounds began to fill the streets. Among them were clapping, shouts of All Might's name, wails mourning the sure-to-be retirement of the #1 hero, and people's questions about who the hero's successor is. At the center of all of this, Izuku sobbed grossly. Ida, Kirishima, and Bakugo could not fault him for that. It was all the recently rescued blonde could do but grab onto one of the greenette's wrists and pull him away from the crowd. "We should get out of here," he spoke to the other 3 students. "The police will need to know I'm safe so they can inform my folks, the school, and the damned press. Neither Ida nor Kirishima argued, both of them also wanting to get Izuku somewhere safe. It was only a matter of time before those who remembered hearing Izuku's name made the connection between that and his face. He had been widely recognized after the sports festival after all. He would never hear the end of it once they did. After Bakugo had been led away by police officials, Ida called Yayurazu to inform them of their location. While the two students who got into U.A. on recommendations would need several minutes to arrive at the station's lobby, the class representative took to calling Aizawa. Since All Might had seen their involvement in Bakugo's rescue, there was no point hiding anything from the teacher. Kirishima also wasn't sure he could snap Izuku out of the daze he was in. Since being released from his childhood friend's grip, Izuku had gone silent. He simply stared forwards, sitting on one of the lobby chairs with tear after tear trailing down his cheek. Neither of his friends could get a verbal response from him. He didn't move much either. He was completely unresponsive. Todoroki would later call it a type of panic attack, Yayurazu a type of shock. Aizawa-sensei. The four students called out when the underground hero arrived in his usual attire. His face shone with disappointment, but the worry in his eyes stood out the most. Worry for one of his problem children. I'll be speaking with you four later. For now I want you to go home, but expect a phone call from the school. Following the dismissal, he walked over to where Izuku sat catatonic. From what Ida had explained over the phone, and what he gathered from the newscast, Aizawa could say his student was definitely in shock. Crouching down so he was a little below eye level with Izuku, the teacher slowly brought his hand in front of the boy's face and snapped his fingers. Zero recognition passed through those green eyes. Midoriya, he tried, when the boy still seemed stuck in his own head. Aizawa reached out to grab one of the boy's hands. The response was instantaneous. Flinching back forcefully, Izuku blinked in rapid succession until he was squinting at his homeroom teacher. Aizawa-sensei, what are you? Where are All Might? Is he okay? Calm down there, problem child. All Might wasn't injured badly enough to keep him down for long. He's receiving treatment by the best medical professionals in the area. Who I'm more worried about right now, he continued with a softening tone, is you. Izuku's lower lip wobbled at the genuine care in the older man's voice. I'm scared. And why is that? As much as I want to expel the lot of you for your more than obvious involvement in rescuing Bakugo, we can deal with a less drastic punishment later. All Might will live. I assume you're fine physically. Yes, but, and you, will do all in its power to protect you from those who would want to target you for your quirk. The greenette tilted his head in confusion. What? Aizawa rolled his eyes before moving the hand on the boy's own to ruffle his curly hair. Did you think the sudden reveal that you're All Might's successor would stop us from doing our jobs? If anything, this will just make your teachers strive harder to teach you to the best of our abilities. I for one won't be treating you any differently though, so don't think you'll be getting any special treatment. Just because All Might gave you his quirk doesn't mean I will let my attention to my other students waver. He might pick favorites, but I won't. I wouldn't want you to do any of that anyway, sensei. Izuku let out a small laugh. I'm still scared though. All Might will have to retire now, and without a symbol of peace, the villains might try to act up. The League of Villains especially. Midoriya, I won't deceive you and tell you everything isn't going to go to hell. At some point it very well might. He noticed the frown on the boy's face before switching gears. However, there are countless heroes out there that will just have to work even harder to keep people safe. No matter how many villains rise up, there will be heroes to stop them. No matter how many people are put in danger, there will be those to come to their rescue. In just a couple of years, you will be one of them. This made Izuku burst into tears once more. Thank you, he croaked out seconds before Aizawa pulled him into a comforting hug. The two of them stayed there like that for several minutes before Izuku began to fidget. Standing up, Aizawa noted he would need to do some laundry as soon as possible. Tears and snot did not look good on black. Pushing that thought to the back of his mind for now though, he gestured for his student to follow him. Come on, problem child. I'm going to have to escort you back home. After that newscast, the media are going to be even more unbearable. Izuku stared back at his house one last time. All of his belongings were already packed into the car provided by U.A., and it would be a couple of months until the next long break, where he would be expected to return. That meant he had practically a quarter of the year before he had to worry about the prospect of facing the truth, right? For now, he would be fine. He could cope. Midoriya. The police officer and driver got his attention. Are you almost ready to go, or did you forget to grab something? I would be happy to come with you if you need any assistance. The brunette shook his head, politely rejecting the offer. Thank you, but it's nothing. I'm ready to go now. If you're sure. She smiled, gesturing for him to climb into the passenger seat when he began to head towards the back. As he buckled up, he couldn't tear his eyes away from his apartment complex. It was like the building was looming down over him, the balcony of his apartment reaching towards him, as if to strangle him alive. Was this dread he was feeling all of a sudden? Why did his own home become something he feared? Somewhere he was desperately trying to figure out some way to avoid. He was being pathetic. He didn't want to go back, though. He couldn't go back, not after what took place there just a few days ago. Sweetie. The young police officer chanced a touch to his shoulder, causing him to flinch out of instinct. Her hand is small like Mom's, he thought against his better judgment. Sorry, he answered a few seconds later. I was lost in my own head. I'm really fine. You don't look fine. You're, crying. Was he now? He brought a hand up to his cheek, wincing when it came away wet. It seemed he'd started crying, and he wasn't even aware. Sorry, he repeated sullenly. I miss my mom already. I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to see her again. The officer ruffled his hair in attempts to comfort him before she turned back to the steering wheel to start the car. Don't worry, sweetie. She tried to remedy. You'll be home again before you know it. Izuku turned away to face out the window. It was all he could do to hide the increased flow of tears after all. He also appreciated the rest of the drive being spent in silence, because if he were forced to speak any more, he felt like the mask he'd spent the past few days carefully constructing would very well shatter. Something is wrong with Deku-kun, 𝗬𝗧𝗏 whispered to Ida. The two had just finished unpacking their things and wished to take a quick break before adding the final touches to their rooms. They had convened in the lounge like many other students, thinking after a few minutes that they should check on their friend. When they went to knock on his door, however, the duo stilled at the soft sound of sniffling. The class representative frowned. He seemed fine not too long ago. While I would like to give him his privacy, I believe it is our duty as friends to check on him. How do you feel, 𝗬𝗏𝗏? He asked just as quietly. She nodded, determination clouding the worry in her eyes. He needs our help. With that, Ida knocked on his friend's door, saying his name in greeting as he did so. After several seconds, Izuku popped his head out. It was obvious by the redness underneath his eyes and false cheery smile on his face that he was faking. Hey guys, you already finished setting up your rooms? Sure did, 𝗬𝗏𝗏 confirmed before her smile morphed into a frown. Deku-kun, were you crying a moment ago? Izuku rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. And no, of course not. Why would I be doing that? Ida fixed him with a disapproving stare. After a couple seconds of it, Izuku sighed, the false smile fading into a neutral look. Maybe I was a little bit, he admitted softly. It's not a big deal though. I was just feeling emotional because of the move, honestly. I'll be fine once I get settled in. You two don't need to worry about me, I promise. We'll worry if we wanna, 𝗬𝗏𝗏 countered. That's right. We're your friends, and we want to make sure you're okay. There's also nothing to be ashamed of. Moving can be stressful for everyone involved. The brunette nodded in agreement with Ida's statements. My parents were crying when I left, which made me bawl too. My mother and brother were a bit emotional as well. Izuku's lips curved into a smile at his friend's words. How did he wind up with such amazing, supportive friends? Make sure either one of your parents or guardians signs the permission slip. Aizawa instructed as he passed out the field trip forms. Ever since the training camp disaster, the school was required to at least send out a notice of what type of training their students would be participating in off campus, even if the location had to be kept secret. It was mostly formality to set the parents' minds at ease. Have them back to me by next Friday at the latest. Otherwise, I'll be calling someone for verbal confirmation. Aizawa stared at the permission slip form in his hands with a troubled look on his face. Present Mike noticed this along with his scrutinizing gaze, so he decided to see what the issue was. What's got your scarf in a twist, Shota? The homeroom teacher of class, Wana stared into his friend's glasses tiredly. Izuku Midoriya, one of my problem children, decided to forge his mother's signature. He turned the form around so the blonde could see. What I don't understand is why. He's a troublesome kid when it comes to many things, but he's never been dishonest before. He had to have known I would recognize the chicken scratch he calls handwriting. Present Mike shrugged. Maybe his mom is out of town and couldn't sign it. According to the records, his dad is most likely not in the picture since all of his contact forms only have her on them. If that's the case, he probably thought it wouldn't be a big deal to sign in her stead. I suppose, but I would expect someone like him to be honest with me. I would have offered to call her and take a verbal confirmation. I've already had to do that for a few students who don't have the time or money to have visited their families this past weekend. I'm going to have to call her now regardless, he added as he picked up his desk phone and dialed the boy's home telephone number first just to be sure. He'd called this phone number so many times it was committed to memory. Whatever floats your boat, man. If she's on a trip, though she might be too busy to answer. True to his assumption, 𝗵𝗃 didn't answer either number provided on the emergency contact form. What set off flags for the teacher, though, was the response he got back from dialing the elder 𝗵𝗃's cell phone number. I'm sorry, but it appears this number has been disconnected. Goodbye. She probably had to change numbers or got another phone. President Mike waved off the other's concerns. You worry too much, 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏. Just let the boy go on the field trip. I mean, you could talk to the little listener about forging the signature, but I don't think this warrants anything else. Later, Izawa would kick himself for listening to President Mike. He should have approached the boy about the incident right away. Yet it took something more upsetting to bring the truth to light. Deku! Izuku jumped at Bakugo's shout. The blonde was crossing the common room with a scowl on his face, cell phone in hand. Why yes, Kekken. What's up? The old hag can't get a hold of your mom to talk to her. She's called your house a couple times the past few days, and all she gets in an answering machine. Her cell phone number comes back saying it's disconnected. What gives? The other students on the lounge couldn't help but listen in. None of them figured out anything was wrong though, even as Izuku let out the most nervous chuckle they'd ever heard. Mom's been away from home because she's visiting family. Her cell phone died a couple weeks ago though, and she keeps putting off getting a new one. Bakugo almost bought it. Her birthday is in 2 days though, nerd. Are you telling me she's not going to be home by then? That would mean you would have no way of getting a hold of her either. Izuku's eyes filled with sadness. His throat constricted as he bit out a, yeah, it's really unfortunate, but at least she's happy. Before getting up and leaving the room. To everyone's surprise, Bakugo looked worried all of a sudden. More worried than any of his classmates could ever imagine him appearing. Kirishima voiced as much. Auntie Inko would never not have a way of contacting Deku. She's too much of a worrier, he stated seriously. And that means Deku is lying. Why would he lie? Dude, Kaminari voiced from where he and Siro were playing a video game at the television. Mina hummed in agreement. It does seem out of character for Midori to be dishonest. I have no clue what's going on, Bakugo said. But if my old hag can't get a hold of her soon, then I'll have to beat the truth out of him. True to his word. 1 week later, Bakugo had the perfect opportunity to do just that. One-on-one combat training, huh? Izuku muttered as he looked at the chart All Might had posted. I have to fight. Kakken. Dread swept over him at the absolutely vicious smirk on his childhood friend's features. Hey, Deku! The blonde shouted across the ring. They were both in their P uniforms, yet Bakugo still looked as intimidating as he did when he was in his hero costume. If I win this, you need to answer a question for me, you got it? Kakken, what are you? An explosion cut off his words and forced him to act. He would worry about what Bakugo could be talking about if he lost. Sadly, it seemed fate wasn't on his side today. The fight had become intense much faster than either of them had expected at first. Bakugo never went easy, but Izuku was fighting with more passion than he had in the past couple of weeks. It was like he was unsure what would happen if he lost the fight. Die already, Bakugo shouted during his final push. The blonde was tired of playing around. He wanted answers, and he wanted them today. Twisting expertly around while in midair, the boy used his explosions to blow Izuku up into the air before he grabbed his leg and threw him towards the ground. The greenette tried to right himself as he fell, but to his horror, he felt strong calloused hands gripping the back of his head while digging a knee into his back. Izuku was barely able to break his fall using his quick on his legs, and he still needed to cover his face with his arms to avoid breaking his nose. A moment later, he found his arms being twisted behind his back, while Bakugo sat on him triumphantly. Looks like I win, nerd. Izuku's heart plummeted. What did you want to know, Kakken? The greenette asked his childhood friend later that afternoon. Classes had just gotten out, but Bakugo wasn't about to let Izuku slink off to hide in his room. That meant they had made it look as if they were leaving individually only to come back into their classroom when all others had left. The intensity of the blonde's red-eyed gaze burned. Deku, he started with the most level tone he'd used in a long while. Where has Auntie Inko been? I told you, she's been visiting family. Cut the crap. You told me that a week ago, and the excuse was barely passable as it was. Tell me what's really going on. Izuku remained silent. Within seconds, Bakugo's temper sparked, and he was pushing the other against the wall forcefully. "Tell me, damn it. I know something's going on. My old hag went over to your house after work 2 days ago, and no one answered. She visited again later that night, and there was still no answer. So what gives? Is she in the hospital or something?" "No. Deku." A hint of concern slipped into the word, and the trace of it made Izuku's breath hitch. His heart ached as he caught sight of Bakugo's red eyes. While they were filled with his usual anger and frustration, there was an emotion on his face Izuku didn't often see: fear. Izuku's mask cracked and shattered. He couldn't lie to him anymore. "Kaken," he started as his chin dropped to his chest, his entire form beginning to shake as tears welled up in his eyes. "Mom left." The fire left Bakugo's eyes in an instant, like Izuku's tears had extinguished them. He released his hold on the other, lowering his arms and taking a step back. "What do you mean she left?" "She's not." The younger shook his head. "She's alive and happy somewhere else." "That doesn't make any sense." "She couldn't take it anymore," Izuku suddenly lashed out, his voice rough with emotion. "The day after everyone was visited by the teachers to see if we could live in the dorms, she packed up her things and left. She said she couldn't live worrying about me any longer, and that leaving was the only option she could come up with to handle the pain. I tried to stop her," he hiccuped, "but even giving up my dream didn't change her mind. Now I don't even know where she is." "Her phone, she disconnected it on purpose?" He nodded while bringing an arm up to his eyes. Wetness soaked his skin immediately, his tears being a long way from running out. "It's all my fault," Izuku continued brokenly. "Because I kept getting hurt. Because I didn't pay enough attention to how she felt. Because I didn't give up on my dream soon enough." "Deku, shut the hell up and look at me." A hand gripped his shoulder tightly, but not painfully so. When Izuku was finally able to lower his arm, so he could look at Bakugo, he wasn't shocked to see his telltale glare. "Who knows?" Izuku gulped. "Just you." "You've got to be shitting me right now." The blonde's grip hardened. "You haven't told Four Eyes and Round Face yet? What about All Might or the ugly caterpillar, Kaken? You really need to rethink those nicknames." "I didn't want to bother them. I'm fine." "Really?" "Bullshit. Don't lie to me, Deku. Of course you're not fine. Talk to someone, you hear me? I don't care who, but sooner or later you is going to find out. Our classmates don't deserve a damn thing when it comes to an explanation. But you need to get this sorted out. This situation is messed up. I can't believe she'd just up and go like that." Anger seeped into his voice. For a moment Izuku was in awe that such fury was directed at someone other than him. Then, he realized it was still his mother they were talking about. "Are you going to tell your mom?" Bakugo's eyes darkened. "Yeah, she's going to call you when I do though. I can wait a couple days until you're ready if you want. But she deserves to know. And once she knows, she's going to track your mom down to give her a piece of her mind." With that, the blonde removed his hand, turning around and walking out of the classroom to leave the greenette standing there alone. Izuku opened his mouth to tell him he didn't want that to happen, even though Bakugo was well out the door, the conversation having made his mind sluggish. He was already so emotionally exhausted from the encounter. It was all he could do to trudge back to the dorm. He would bring this up to All Might tomorrow. The impending conversation was throwing his entire day off. He'd been jittery since his first class, and his nerves were only worsening as the day went on. He should have known by the last class of the day that taking part in special move training was not something he should do without focus. Still, he found himself practicing a newly developed move, while his mind raced about how to approach All Might. The man was standing off to the side, discussing something with Aizawa at the moment. Glancing over at the retired hero and his teacher, Izuku wasn't paying attention to Sato, who was fighting Kirishima atop a rocky outcrop. He also didn't hear the warning that part of the rock formation was giving away. "Midoriya, move!" Kirishima yelled just as a large amount of the outcrop detached from the rest of it. The greenette finally seemed to shake out of it when the rock was already halfway down. However, the sound of engines filled his ears faster than he could react. A few seconds later, Ida was standing next to a shaken Izuku with worry plain on his face. "Midoriya," Ida started in concern. "You've been distracted all day, and you almost got hurt. You're putting yourself in unnecessary danger. What's going on?" "Sorry, Ida-kun, you know you can talk to me, right?" "I know. I promise I know that. But," Aizawa's stern voice cut him off. "Midoriya, come here. All Might and I would like to discuss something with you." Izuku gulped, half relieved he could get away from his friend, and half terrified the adults noticed his screw-up. Sometime later Izuku found himself standing in an office space attached to the training building. All Might and Aizawa assured him the room was soundproof, and that no one would be let in, which only raised the Greenette's anxiousness. "I'm really sorry for not paying attention back there," Izuku began apologetically. "Something was on my mind, but I promise it won't happen again." All Might smiled slightly. "We understand it happens sometimes, my boy. But that's not entirely the reason we wanted to talk to you." The blonde turned to his companion pointedly. Aizawa stared at Izuku for a long moment. There was a mix of some very complicated emotions in the hero's eyes that Izuku couldn't decipher. "Midoriya, I overheard what you told Bakugo yesterday." Izuku froze. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I was sleeping underneath the desk when you two walked in. I only woke up when Bakugo started yelling at you, but by that point it was too late for me to make myself known. I apologize for the invasion of your privacy. On the other hand, I have not informed All Might here of the situation. I was hoping you could do that. Perhaps then we could figure out where to go from here." While he talked, Izuku's breathing accelerated. For a moment it felt like he was going to have a panic attack, so he dropped to his knees with his teachers following him to the floor. "My boy," All Might was practically begging. He'd been worried about Izuku ever since the semester had begun. Something was off about him, and the hero wanted nothing more than to fix the problem hurting the boy. "What happened?" There was a long moment of silence. During this time Aizawa and All Might met each other's eyes a couple of times, remaining patient that the Greenette kneeling between them would offer some sort of explanation. After nearly 5 minutes of concentrated breathing, he did just that. She left. Both teachers felt sick, Aizawa already having heard it once, not making it any more pleasant to hear. He'd been expecting something was going on for weeks. Those 2 words more or less confirmed their worst fears. "Young Midoriya," All Might questioned, his tone far gentler than he'd ever used. He didn't want to ask for specifics, but he needed to know. "What do you mean by that?" That was all it took to break the dam. Tears fell from the boy's eyes like a profusely leaking faucet. His entire body began to shake as he attempted to gasp out what he knew he should have told them over a month ago. Not even the feeling of All Might's hand rubbing his back comfortingly was helping alleviate his anguish. "Mom, she left," he repeated brokenly. "The day after she said I could live on campus, I noticed her packing a suitcase. When I asked her about it, she said she was going to be taking a trip to visit a friend. So it wasn't until that evening that I realized her behavior was odd. It was only because the photo of us together on her dresser was gone. The empty picture frame sat on her bedside dresser oh so innocently. It had no idea that it hadn't been empty since the day after he was born." "Mom!" He ran out of her room yelling, his voice raw with panic. Something was wrong. "Mom, where are you?" crying answered his ears. "I'm in the kitchen, Izuku," she called back half-heartedly, just as he burst through the doorway. Their emerald eyes met each other, both tearful. "Mom, you're not going to visit a friend, are you?" The tiniest hint of a somber smile on her face was all the answer he needed. "Please, Mom, why are you crying? Where are you going? What happened? I can't take it anymore, sweetie. I'm sorry." What? She closed her eyes like not looking at him was the only way for her to keep it together. "After yesterday I realized there's no way to stop you from hurting yourself. Even if you hadn't stayed at you're bound to hurt yourself no matter where you go, because you're going to be a hero someday. You're actually already a hero, from what I heard. And while that makes me happy and proud, I can't help the pain in my chest. It's gotten so bad these past months. I expected it to lessen up after hearing All Might's declaration to raise you to be the next symbol of peace." She paused when a couple tears passed through her closed eyes. "But it didn't, Izuku. It got worse." "Mom," Izuku stepped forward with an outstretched hand, only to freeze when she looked up at him. Her eyes were full of regret. "I'm sorry, Izuku, but I can't take it anymore. I can't stay here anymore knowing you're going to destroy yourself. No matter the righteous, cause I just can't take it, so I'm leaving." Leaving?" he parroted back dumbly. Was his hearing damaged? "Yes. I've arranged the bills so that they will all be paid automatically from your father's funds. There are notes on how to manage the account, keep track of the payments on the apartment among other bills, and so on should anything come up. I'm leaving the place to you so you can take care of yourself. The recipe for your favorite meal, katsudon, is among the notes I mentioned earlier. I taught you to cook, so you can't be serious." The younger Midoriya cut her off. "Mom, I love you. You can't just leave." She smiled sadly as more tears escaped. "Yes, I can. I've already been granted approval to switch to another office in a different city." "What city?" "I'd rather you didn't know. You'll try to find me one day, and you might very well succeed, which is why I'm going to ask that you don't seek me out. Can you promise me that?" Of course not. Sweetie, please? For your mother? Izuku dropped to his knees in despair. This was all because he wanted to be a hero, and had hurt himself so badly his mother couldn't cope. This was all his fault. Mom, please. He bowed his head, his hands curling into his knees, so hard his nails broke skin. I'll give up on being a hero altogether. No, you won't. I will, I promise. I'll do anything if it means not losing you. Inko shook her head. Even if you're telling the truth, I couldn't live with myself if I was the reason you gave up on your dream. But you could live with yourself if you left? I'm honestly not even sure about that yet, she admitted sadly. After a moment, she looked at the clock on the microwave and stood up in alarm. Izuku waited for her to say more, but instead she merely got up and rushed to the door. It was only after she'd slipped her shoes on that he noticed 2 bags by the door waiting for her. This was happening. She was going to leave. Mom, he begged one more time. I love you. I love you. Please don't do this. I'm sorry, Izuku, but this is the only way. I love you too. And if you truly love me, you won't stop or follow me. You're going to be a fine hero one day. Maybe sometime in the future, we'll both be strong enough, and I'll see you again. Until then, she stated quietly while placing a kiss on her son's head. Allow All Might to raise you in my stead. I trust him to raise you better than I ever could. Mom, he sobbed grossly. Please. She turned around and opened the door. Goodbye, sweetie. The door shut a second later, and Izuku wondered if his neighbors could hear his wails. They would surely hear his cries the next day when he tried to call his mother only to find out her number was no longer in service. She'd disconnected her phone, the last means Izuku had to contact her. Once he'd recounted the story, he stopped talking. The only sounds in the room were the sounds of his hiccups. All Might and Aizawa were speechless. Then, all at once, rage sparked in the underground hero's eyes. Midoriya, he started while placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. All Might leaned back slightly so Izuku could turn to face the shaggy-haired man. Midoriya, you must know that what happened isn't your fault. The boy's eyes shut tightly. I don't believe that. Young Midoriya, please. If it's anyone's fault, it's my own. All Might stated regretfully. I was the one that failed in my teaching. I should have trained you better, protected you longer. It is because of me that you're both wrong. Aizawa cut in tersely. The fault lies in no one but his mother. She was the one that chose to leave. She abandoned you. Izuku shook his head. You don't understand. She spent her entire life raising me on her own, watching me get hurt since I was 4. Her nerves have gotten worse over the years. Her chest aches when I make her worry too much. There's nothing doctors could do but tell her to get away from her stressors. One of those stressors just happens to be me. Please don't get her in trouble. She didn't abandon me. She was taking care of herself. His homeroom teacher seemed just as mad as before, but All Might remained calm. We'll figure something out. In the case of a missing, deceased, or negligent parent, guardianship is transferred temporarily to the student's homeroom teacher, as per the most recent U.A. contract. Unless, of course, you have other family members willing to take you in. My father works abroad. He wouldn't be able to care for me without losing his job. And he's an orphan, so there's no family on that side. My mom's family is either in America or has passed away. I don't want to leave Japan though, All Might. I can't. I don't want you to either, which leaves us with the options of locating your mother and hoping she chooses to come back rather than face charges for leaving you. Emancipating you, which would prove to be a struggle without getting your mother involved, or the retired hero looked Aizawa for a long moment. Or your homeroom teacher can assume temporary guardianship until you turn 18. That would be up to the both of you though. Izuku met Aizawa's eyes with his own widening ones. They appraised each other for so long All Might was going to tell the greenette he could have time to think it over after school. But to his surprise, Aizawa spoke first. That's in roughly 2 years, right? I suppose I can watch over one of my problem children for that long. Really? Izuku couldn't help but ask. But I'm already a handful as a student. Are you sure you really want to assume responsibility of me? If my own mom couldn't handle me, why would you want me? I'd be honored to have you, he answered with complete seriousness. It made Izuku want to weep. But luckily he held it at bay. I hope you don't mind cats though. I have a lot of them. Also, Present Mike and Midnight like to visit unexpectedly. All Might moved in next door to me last week too. So beware of him coming over for meals most nights. He can't cook to save his life apparently. Hey. Izuku felt laughter bubbling up. At the same time, he felt the urge to cry again. Their kindness was overwhelming. I'd really like that, he finally said. Thank you, Izawa-sensei, All Might. The shaggy-haired man shook his head. Just call me Izawa outside class, kid. It's going to be weird hearing it at home otherwise. And call me Tashinori, All Might added. It'd be bad if anyone heard you calling me by my hero name outside the gates. Don't want to attract too much extra attention, right, my boy? Yeah, you're right. The three of them stood up then, Izuku feeling embarrassed that he'd cried all over All Might. It was obvious by the large wet spot on his shirt. Nevertheless, the retired hero laughed it off. Nothing a change in shirt won't fix. Why don't we head back to the main school building together? We'll both change, and we can take a short trip off campus. There's this new ice cream shop I've been wanting to try called. Izuku listened to All Might describe the ice cream shop they'd be visiting fondly. He remembered something his mother had said. I trust All Might to raise you better than I ever could. She was wrong, so wrong. No one could ever replace her. As he thought about the conviction his homeroom teacher spoke with when offering to care for him though, All Might's smaller but fatherly gestures also entering his mind, he decided maybe he could make it through this. Maybe things would be okay. Young Midoriya, are you in there? You're staring into space, and it's a little disconcerting. Izuku snapped out of his thoughts, a sheepish smile rising to his face. Sorry, I'm listening, I promise. Well, hello there listening, I promise, I'm All Might. The greenette's jaw dropped. Did he just made a dad joke?